Okay, there we go. Hey, everyone. So we're getting ready to have this amazing debate with Matt Sands and Victor Pross in regards to the border issue that's on the minds of a lot of people these days. I'm sure you all recognize out there that you're hearing a lot of ideologically driven narratives by a lot of people as it pertains to the border issues or migration or immigration. What people like myself or Victor and Matt want to do is at least give you some clarity of thought, some clarity of mind, and some clarity of their positions, because not everything, even though I did set this up as a black or white issue, it was kind of to show that it's not actually that way. There is some nuance. There is some gray area, especially in regards to how the human mind thinks and how it pertains to an issue that's so expansive as immigration. Most of us, I think, understand that throughout most of history, modern history, immigration should have been something that would have been openly embraced, I think, by most people from either side of the political spectrum, just by sheer fact that, well, at least if you're a decent moral person, just by sheer fact that people should have the ability to seek out other places where they can strive and thrive and try to attempt to be successful or bring meaning to their life. So borders are one issue that reflects that. The problem is today we do live in an era where we do have a welfare state. We do have governments that get to forcefully impose or forcefully redistribute the incomes of their domestic citizens. Under that kind of paradigm, that's why you see a great divide today, even from people that have political leanings, whether they come from the left or the right, or even people that are apolitical or philosophical in nature. It's just a understanding of the fact that we have to deal with pragmatism and the reality and the reflection of the reality that we all have to endure. Like, we would all love to believe, I'm sure Victor, I'm sure Matt, I know myself, I would love to believe that we live in some conceptual world where everybody could just live freely and peaceful amongst each other. But we all understand that's a pipe dream. That's utopian. That's not reality. We can all dream of those things. We can write, we can, poetry, art, those are beautiful things. And that's what we should all strive for. But we have to deal with these issues in a nuanced way so that it's not just black or white. It's a matter of some of that gray area. And that's what we're going to do today in this conversation. So I'm just going to let Matt and Victor, both of them, give themselves like 5 minutes each to take the time and put forth their initial position on the issue. I'm not sure which one you want to start, but Matt, Victor, M.
Flip a coin.
Before V. What's that? We'll let Matt go first. How's that, Matt?
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. Just to quickly introduce sort of where I'm coming from. I'm an advocate for a would-be movement called Nations of Sanity, which is a very specific representation of voluntarism, and the basic premise is we should try to create a free society, or otherwise known as voluntarism, by establishing the non-aggression principle as the law through a peace agreement, basically making it the terms of peace between all people. That's how I think we should achieve a free society, and that is how I think we would define a free society. With regards to immigration, I'll just very briefly sort of lay down my position, and obviously I can elaborate as I discuss it with Victor going forward. But the long and the short of it is, for an anarchist or a voluntarist or a libertarian or anyone really with an understanding and appreciation for self-ownership, property rights and the non-aggression principle, the position with regards to state border, the position regarding borders is that the only border you can violently enforce is that of rightfully owned private property. Obviously the state borders are neither rightfully owned or private property. So although I do understand the nuance of Victor's position with regards to the implications with welfare state and voting and what have you, and we'll obviously delve into that as we go forward, but that's the basic position of an anarchist in my view, that's consistent with the non-aggression principle, is we can't advocate for state violence. And although I realize it isn't quite as simple as that with regards to the implications, the fact of the matter is we can't enforce state borders in line with the non-aggression principle because they are illegitimate, and as such enforcing them would be illegitimate as well. So that's basically my position in a brief, and we can sort of go into more detail as we go forward.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt, for giving that initial premise as far as your stance on the issue. I think you did a great job there. Go ahead, Victor.
All right. Okay, very good. Yeah. Well, you know, I think that there's probably a very great possibility for agreement here. I think that I just think it's just a matter of epistemology, understanding where we're both coming from. And we might, lo and behold, find to our great pleasure and delight that maybe we don't disagree after all. So I'm looking forward to that. I think that that's a very real potential that we have right here. So, you know, let it to be, just to make my point clear, because if anybody who's been following me for the last 2 years know that I've been tarred and feathered with this statist label because I just question the validity of the state, right? So, or of an open border, rather, because I question the legitimacy of an open border. Therefore, you know, kind of put me on, whoa, that sounds like a dog whistle for nationalism. Statist, Victor, you know? So that's been like a gong show that's been going on. So let me make my point here clear. As the last 10 years of recorded history on YouTube and articles and debates and live presentations testifies that backs up where I stand today and where I've always stood. I am an advocate for a free market and private property. Consistently. I am a full-blown Rothbarian, private property card-carrying, non-aggression, principle-loving anarchist. I am not a statist. So you have with the border, if you're in a free society, borders, if we're gonna use that term at all, it's determined and enforced by private property owners instead of a small cadre of people calling themselves government. That's the principle. That's the principle. As soon as you get government in there at all, then the question of open or closed border just still retains its status as a government fiat in either case. So I don't think the principled position is to take the case for open or closed borders, but to recognize where your philosophical foundation, anarchism, which does not involve the state. So therefore, a closed or open border in either case is a matter of government fiat, subject to change or expansion, and only for the benefit of the ruling elite, and always, as clearly as can be seen in today's world, always at the expense of the host population. So I can cut it off there, and we can go ahead and have any questions or fellow rebuttal or commentary, feel free.
Hey, well said, Victor. And you know what? Just as the very first point I want to bring in regards to both of your gentlemen's stance on this issue is, boy, the central planners that have been ruling things have really placed us all in a precarious situation. That's ultimately how I look at things these days. Is we have to take these stances and kind of battle against each other. But I'm glad that we're at least all willing to do so, because every intellectual conversation or debate such as this helps educate and elevate the mind of anyone else that's consuming this kind of content, and it helps give them a little clarity of thought, a little clarity of mind. And that's actually something I want to point out before we actually start getting really into this thing, is try to, when you're bringing up like the big terms and things, just try to at least try to stick to, because this is what I try to hold myself to in particular, because I realize the sophists of today, just like the sophists in the past, manipulate the language, regardless of the language you use, and here we're using English, but they manipulate the language and completely reinvent the terms that we use. And, you know, with anyone, if you speak a language, you know, the only way you can speak back and forth with each other.
That's left-wing academia.
Yeah, well, and the only way you can actually speak back and forth with each other is if you actually understand the true definitions of the terms and words you're using.
Absolutely.
So keep that kind of clarity of the language, clarity of thought, and clarity of mind helps educate and inform people properly. That way they can delve into these things without coming at it from the wrong. You know, if you tell something that's incorrect as far as like facts as pertain to the language, then the person's not going to be able to actually have an objective or well-informed opinion. So that's at least all I will ask that of both of you gentlemen, stick to like even just the term liberal that you brought up, Victor. I don't even refer to these people as liberals. That's one thing that I did. And sometimes I find myself making that mistake as well, but they're not liberals, because just look up what a liberal means. They were,
I know.
So
that's why we have to call it. That's why we have to call it classical liberalism, to make the distinction, because of the epistemological jungle. And I do agree with Ayn Rand that where she said that definitions are the guardians of rationality. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. Anyway, so like I say, so since Matt started out and you offered, both of you gentlemen offered your initial statements, then Matt, you go ahead and take the floor, man.
Yeah, and well, as you say, it is important to clarify terms and the meanings behind the words we're using. Obviously, we're both going into this with good faith, so we should be able to understand each other well enough and clarify where it needs to be clarified. Right. I mean, yeah, I mean, as I say, I personally identify as a voluntarist, kind of the same as an anarchist, similar to a libertarian. I mean, the word libertarian's been, a lot of people who identify as libertarian, I struggle to distinguish from conservatives a little bit. So again, that's another example of where a label kind of gets stretched beyond its original kind of meaning. But I like the term voluntarist because I think it hits closer to what it's all about, even more so than anarchist, because anarchist is basically, yeah, we don't want a state ruling us. Voluntarist is more about, we want an actual free society, and it more specifies, you know, the non-aggression principle, self-ownership, and property rights being, you know, basically what it's all about. And also it helps distinguish proper anarchism from, you know, anarcho-communism and nonsense like that. So, so I prefer the term voluntarist for that reason. And as I say, yeah, just to sort of reiterate my point with regards to the borders thing. And as I say, I do understand that there's, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't even want to interrupt you, but I just wanted to actually get you to help clarify this, not just for me, but for anyone that's going to watch this. Because actually, when you were talking about that, I have actually never delved into it. I fully understand the term voluntarism, but I'm just curious myself. Whereas at least libertarians, because of its philosophical endeavor, it does at least have a baseline grounding as far as the principles. So non-aggression principle, self-ownership, private property. Does voluntarism at least have a structure of kind of rules? Because like I said, anarchists, libertarians, voluntarists, I recognize that we're probably always against some superimposed state. But one thing I understand about libertarians is that they at least have the premise of how we should deal with each other in society, and it's universally consistent. So does voluntarism, and I'm, like I say, I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, I'm just really looking for clarity here. Does voluntarism, because I've never actually delved into it too much, does that entail actual, like the same kind of concept as far as, like, you know, the non-aggression principle and such?
Yeah, I mean, I basically would sort of define it as what libertarianism should be, or, I mean, I suppose you could describe libertarianism, anarchism, and voluntarism could all be different words for the same thing in that sense, because many anarchists just, you know, identify with the non-aggression principle as their basis for their objection to governments and rulers. Like, as you say, libertarianism is very embedded with the non-aggression principle. I mean, voluntarism is really like libertarianism, but perhaps a purist version where it's literally focusing on that. I mean, like I say, the only problem I have with libertarianism, a lot of so-called libertarians, as I say, are often minarchists. They're not full-out voluntarists. You know, they'll accept a bit of government here and there and stuff like that. So that's why I don't use the term libertarian myself, because, as I say, many are almost indistinguishable from conservatives. So, I mean, anarchist is closer to it, but I think voluntarist is the most accurate term. I mean, basically, I think the non-aggression principle defines crime objectively and universally. It defines aggression objectively and universally. As a result of that, that's why, like with the Nations of Sanity, the whole idea of making it the law through a peace agreement, because obviously you can't have an authority bringing down the law, but you can still establish law as the terms of peace, because that's what law is. It's basically the terms of peace. It's basically saying this is when you're breaking the peace and we'll use force against you. So, I mean, it's very similar, almost the same to libertarianism in that sense, that the non-aggression principle defines what is a crime and what is not a crime, doesn't deal with higher ideals. You know, we'll have different preferences and higher moralities, subjective moralities, but the basic objective standard of aggressing against somebody, which the non-aggression principle covers. And like you say, you couple that with the concept of self-ownership, and property rights is just an extension of self-ownership. You know, it comes from that. So it's all built around, but I kind of view the non-aggression principle as the overriding principle. And then you've got self-ownership and you've got property rights basically as an extension of that.
Yeah, Matt, and maybe we could bridge any possible gaps, since you do bring up voluntarism and non-aggression. Would you agree with me that, as understood by anarchists in the anarchist communities or anarchist philosophy, if you want to put it that way, that aggression has to be carefully defined? You can't have this some kind of like socialist or zeitgeist idea of exploitation, that somebody's being violently coerced just because the sales lady at the candy bar upsold the customer from a small Coke to a large one, also including in there a popcorn as aggression, right? Zeitgeist fantasy bullshit robot world, right? So non-aggression, that the only way that you could possibly ever rationally violate somebody's rights or assert aggression against them takes the form of force against, always right across the board, against their will. And the only way that you can do that is through murder, kidnapping, theft, fraud, which is an indirect use of force, and rape. Physical coercion. It has to be physical, and it has to be against the person's will. That's the non-aggression principle, very easily defined in a very condensed form.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's an important clarification to make, because I mean, it's probably, this ties to the limitations with our language, you know, aggression. I mean, I often say you can do what you want as long as you don't cause harm to others. But then people are like, well, what sort of harm? Emotional harm? And I'm like, no, you know, so and even with aggression, like you say, some people can define aggression in all kinds of absurd ways. So it is important to clarify what we're talking about when we're talking about aggression, when we're talking about causing people harm. You know, as I say, people do take these things to ridiculous extremes.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, one of the rationales I've heard for the whole property is theft nonsense was the idea that you're stopping me from walking in a straight line if your house is in the straight line I want to walk. I mean, it's madness, and it's kind of Walter Block's spoken before about the continuum problem. Like, even when you've got a black and white standard of this is right and this is wrong, there's still sometimes a continuum problem of precisely where you draw the line. One of the reasons why the peace agreement that the Nations of Sanity presents is a three-part agreement is to deal with that continuum problem, because simply getting everyone to agree to establish the non-aggression principle as law on its own wouldn't quite do the trick. And for that reason, part one is just that part of the agreement. And then part two is drawing those lines, though what I call the lines in the sand, to draw limits of tolerance over differing interpretations, because there are grey areas, there are fuzzy edges, and that's fine, we can accept that, but we need to draw lines so people don't stretch interpretations to absurdities. You know, so that like for example, there's a big difference between me building property around your property and essentially imprisoning you, meaning you cannot move, and me building a house, like I say, within a straight line that you want to walk, and you've got to deviate a few meters on your journey, you know. So, you know, there's one thing is certainly not stopping you. Again, it's like, I mean, just to give an example of how absurd it is if I was standing in the middle of a field, then you're going to walk in a straight line, and I happen to be standing in that straight line you're going to walk, you might have to step to the left or to the right a meter or so to avoid me. I'm not stopping you from going on your way. But if you're walking down, say, a narrow pathway, and I put my arms out and literally blocked you, then that obviously is. And these are rational distinctions that any rational person should make. But I think the fact that you have the nonsensical claims about property being theft based on ridiculous notions of, well, you're stopping me walking in a straight line, or, you know, what have you, because there are always going to be idiots that will push interpretations into absurdity. That's why I think you need to draw those lines, you know, just to sort of say, okay, well, we might be able to have a rational debate over exactly where we draw the line here and here, but over there, you know, it's pretty black and white.
Okay, good. No, so what we've established then so far, this is not a, this is why I had issue with the title of the video that you're going to go there, you know, open border closes versus closed border, open versus closed, you know, that whole thing, right? So since we've established that we are coming at this not as like I'm a conservative and you're an anarchist or a voluntarist, we're talking about two, you and me, Matt. as volunteers, as anarchists, and that's where we're coming at this. So we both agree to the proper rational definition of what constitutes aggression versus a socialist or zeitgeist type of interpretation that goes off into left-wing fantasy land, a kabuki theater of absurd concepts and ideas that have flowed up into Plato's helium balloon. But so now we're both on the same ground level. That's what I get from this, and that's beautiful. That's a beautiful thing. I wish I could have established that with Lark and Rose, but too bad. So
actually, Victor,
I wanted to ask him if you do advocate property rights and how you understand that. Go ahead, Ben. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, I actually, I just wanted to point out for a little bit of clarity based on both of your gentlemen's statements so far. You're both actually completely aligned with what I would completely expect. Like I say, not even knowing Matt from a hole in the ground, but you're both coming from a position that makes 100% sense. And why that is because you're suggesting that you should deal with each other as individuals and every incident, every situation as an isolated situation or incident. That's the beautiful thing, like Matt suggested and what alluded to, and what Victor I'm sure aligns with completely is yes, let's deal. That's the beautiful thing about the individual thought and dealing with people as individuals rather than collectives. Is yes, there's lots of situations or scenarios that you can paint where there might be this thing where there is that gray area. Where do you fall on it, right? But it is the sheer fact that we can deal with each other as individuals and each case or incident as individual cases or incidents that allows us to not be so rigid, right? That's the beautiful thing about it. Anyways, that's all I want to find out.
If we are on opposite sides of this issue. That's what I want to find out. That's so I don't want to cause gaps. I want to bridge, and that's what brings me to my question. Is that we agree on so much right now. Do we agree that are we advocates, and do you agree with the idea of property rights? And how would you define that if so?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, it's an extension of self-ownership. I mean, basically, you own yourself, you own the product of your labor. Therefore, you can obtain property which you own. I mean, the sort of standard ways to attain property rightful ownership would be to either create something or to voluntarily trade for it. So, like, given a simple example, you either build the house or you buy it off the people that build the house. Either way, the house is yours, assuming it's a voluntary trade, no coercions involved and what have you, and assuming you're not violating the non-aggression principle in any other way. Like I say, I can't build a donut-shaped house around your house and trap you and make it so that you can't leave without trespassing and stuff like that, or I can't build some kind of building that blocks out. I mean, there's, like I say, there's reasonable things as long as I'm not infringing on you. But the basic, the basic premise is that property rights is an extension of self-ownership.
Okay, yeah, and that's that's pretty Rothbarian, I guess. Right wing, John Lockean.
I consider myself right wing, but
yeah. Well, okay, yeah. I'll modify that and take it out, but a Lockean understanding of property rights. Okay, so just to get back onto track of what the discussion's all about, like how do you respond to my initial statement of where I stand on the question of what I regard as the false dichotomy of open versus closed borders, and what would be your case for open borders if indeed you are making a case for open borders? But also accounting for my preamble statements regarding open borders, though.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying with regards to it being a false dichotomy, and I basically agree with that. And I think the area where we're united is on how it should be in a free society, whereas the only valid borders are that of rightfully owned private property. I think where we disagree, or perhaps where, just to sort of, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, obviously, but I think if I'm understanding your position correctly, it's not that we disagree on how it should be in a free society, but what you're saying is we're not in a free society right now. Yeah. We're in a state society, and within that paradigm, and because of things like welfare and voting and what have you, and taxation and that, because of that, it's not quite as simple as there's no such thing as state borders. And although I'm assuming you recognize the principle, I mean, just again, to clarify my position, I'm not an advocate for open state borders with that whole equation of, welfare and what have you. I'm simply saying that obviously in a free society, these state borders wouldn't exist. They'd be a non-issue. we're in a society that's not free, and there's a government that claims these state borders, but I'm saying, as a voluntarist, even within the statist paradigm, we still don't recognize it. Like, just because we're in the statist paradigm, I'm still going to reject all forms of state violence. So I'm still against drug laws, even though they'd be a non-issue in a free society as well. I'm still against any time the state basically initiates force against peaceful people and violates the non-aggression principle. And unfortunately, border enforcement does do that. And while I do understand all the problems associated with immigration, my point is that the crime isn't somebody walking over this arbitrary line. The crime is the government stealing from us, like I say, the whole statist situation. So although I do agree that there's a problem with that equation that includes immigration, the actual criminal element falls at the feet of the state. The state is the criminals involved, and the crime is their is the taxation, is their ruling, and so that's I hope that clarifies my position. That's basically where I'm coming from. I can't condone the state violence used to enforce national borders. In fact, I can't, and it's not just the state doing it, if private people done it as well, because these borders are illegitimate. As I say, the only borders that we can enforce are the borders of rightfully owned private property. And even though I understand that you would be on the same page as me in a free society, I think we differ, because I'm still holding that position in the statist paradigm that we're actually in. And I say, you correct me if I'm wrong, and obviously elaborate your position.
If we were in an anarchist society and you declared yourself by a philosophical tag of being a voluntarist, there's no conflict whatsoever. But you're saying that there is a possible conflict or a difference of opinion that we have that's made possible because there is, in fact, a state that we can find ourselves somehow on opposite sides. And as you said, you cannot morally justify imposed borders. Okay, so would that be a summary of your position then? That's an example of further statism. That's even worse now because you got freaking borders. Is that what you're saying ultimately then?
Yeah, I mean, I'm basically saying that we shouldn't be accepting anything that is a violation of the non-aggression principle. And although I understand that you'd be on the same page as me in a free society, I think we should be adopting the same stance within the statist paradigm. Like, though I appreciate the implications with regards to immigration and the border, and I don't advocate for like I say, the crimes involved with regards to the taxation and the welfare and all the rest of it. But what I'm saying is those are the crimes. As a voluntarist, as an anarchist, that's the crime. That's the violation of the non-aggression principle. Immigrants aren't violating the non-aggression principle, and they're not aggressing against us when they walk over state borders, because it's not a legitimate border, you know, as I say. So that's kind of the where I'm coming from.
Okay, well, let me put this to you. Okay, I just want to establish, you know, the exactness of your position, because, you know, it's not enough just to say, are you for open borders? Why, yes, I am. And then there's no definition of what borders are and what constitutes the legitimacy of it or not. So it has to be fleshed out. So thank you for taking the time on that. Yeah, it's like, and it is for, you know, absolutely for sure, like closed borders, state borders, and passports, and all of this is unnatural, coercive. It's all based on a coercive institution. All of this, of course it is. There's nothing here that can be called the organic, spontaneous movement of people, because it's being infringed upon. So the spontaneity is being juiced out of it, right? So that can't be described as the spontaneous movement of people when you have passports and want to see your papers, you know, as Larkin Rose would put it, right? But by the same token, I would argue, when the welfare state lures welfare migrants, it's like a magnet, and you might, the moral culpability is an issue that can be argued, right? But the fact is, you have the welfare state, and migrants are drawn to a given centrally controlled state, which is made possible by the further exploitation of the host population, is made possible by an open border. So where you have, let's say, for example, the caravan that happening. I don't know what's going on right now with it. I don't know what the status is, but this whole caravan phenomenon that was all the rage of the media, popular media and alternative media, that's not an organic, spontaneous movement of people, for Christ's sakes. That's lefty anarchists are representing it as it was like a natural phenomena, and the state's going to violate their rights. It's a construct and manipulation of the state, for Christ's sakes. That's not a spontaneous movement of people. The whole issue of open versus close is a false economy. The principled position is only to be found in a totally free society. That's where the principle resides. And that is why the open border advocates, by which I mean Larkin Rose and his minions, are wrong, objectively speaking.
Can I just say something real quick there, gentlemen? Because I think this is somewhere you guys might want to delve into. I think a lot of this, because just based on listening to both of your gentlemen's points, and like I say, I respect both of you for putting them out. I think it's great. Both of you seem like you're completely coming from a place of just being decent human beings and just wanting to figure out what's the best way to go forward with this stuff. But what comes to me,
part of my fiery rhetoric there, I do get a little charged up.
No, Victor, don't worry. Like I say, everything, no, completely. It's just as you gentlemen are talking. Like I say, its brain never stops unless I'm sleeping. That's only if I smoke enough dope. But anyway, what I'm just thinking of as a father of two. Doesn't it all come down to, because when you're talking about countries, right? And I mean, we would all love to live, like I say, this utopian where there's no such thing as country borders. But if you think about it, it's kind of like, and they even put forth the notion of the social contract, right? So it's kind of supposed to be like a familial type of structure. And I just think of it as a father of two. If I was raising my two sons, teaching them to be self-reliant, self-efficient, teaching them the good moral principles and values that I hold dear myself. And then if someone come along, like a new entrant, let's say we adopted and didn't have to teach them anything, and they just got that allowance, the same as my two sons that had to figure out that proper social and economic structure and why they should be rewarded and compensated for, doing positive things. The state kind of represents that it's that distortion to me. It's that distortion where the incentives have been so completely destroyed, which is why I see good people like yourself, both of you. I see two really good people that are arguing from a little bit, I think, seemingly from different perspectives or points, but I think ultimately, I think you're both in unison as far as understanding that really what it comes down to ultimately, it's the state, it's the central planners are the ones that are causing all this divide, this divisiveness. I think most people are just live, let live. And I think even biology, history, evolution suggested that was the best strategy going forward, is to not just to be pure domineering. They've shown that even in the animal kingdom, that even under some of the ape species, if you just try to dominate by brute force alone, well, all it'll take a couple betas later to wait till you're sleeping. And then that's, so I think as a structure, even in the animal kingdom, but much more so in the human societies, is it's just a matter of being fair. And what we all recognize out there today with a top-down authoritarian structure is fairness. Well, sometimes it'll work out good for like the domestic population, but if the politician decides that the domestic population isn't construent or aligned with what they want to do, well, they'll look to external entities or structures or populations to put forth. And to me, it's just a matter of freedom. Let freedom, to me, it comes down to let freedom happen. And then you'll see that people will.
Well, that's what we're discussing. We're discussing whether a national border, or if it's where the government imposes all its other encroachments like the welfare state and whatnot, like that's bad enough. But like, at least if the border was open, does that constitute freedom? That's exactly what we're discussing. And I want to hear further from Matt in regards to that. I'm also interested in this whole idea of of what you mentioned about universal law or something to that effect. I do want to ask you about that. If you can conceive of and would advocate a global anarchism, or would you just reside yourself to the issue of a geographical form of anarchism, a given society that actually achieved that state, or would you go for a global anarchism? Because that'd be interesting in regards to the border issue for sure,
Well, I mean,
no borders, yeah.
the law thing, I mean, it's the aim would be global because it's universal law. So, you know, what's a crime over here is a crime over there, and it's a crime everywhere. That's, you know, that's the beauty of the non-aggression principle, is it's a universalizable principle. It's something that can be applied to everybody equally. I mean, I mean, if I'm ever trying to sell this to people of left-wing persuasion, I often invoke terms like equality, and I talk about equal rights. And I say, well, if you want to live in a world where everyone has equal rights, literally, as a matter of mathematical certainty, the only way you get that is if the non-aggression principle is the law, because negative rights are the only rights that can be applied universally. As soon as you violate the non-aggression principle, as soon as you upset that balance, equality of rights, at least, becomes impossible. So, so yeah, I mean, that would be the goal. It's an ambitious one, but that's basically what the Nations of Sanity is proposing. It's basically saying, if we want to create a free society, this is what a free society would look like, and this is how we would create one, is we would establish the non-aggression principle as the universal law, as the universal terms of peace. As yes. I say, it's not quite as simple as that in regards to, that's why it's a three-part agreement, because we need to set the boundaries with the part 2 and perhaps clarify rightful ownership with part 3. That's why it's a three-part agreement rather than a one-part agreement. But that's basically what that 3 parts is about doing. It's just about establishing the non-aggression principles law. Part 1 is to get everyone to agree to that principle, and sort of part 1 would achieve everyone understanding what the non-aggression principle is. And once you've got that, part 2 and 3 are almost self-evident, but I still think they need to be declared ahead of the time, just so everyone knows where they stand. We need to know where the lines in the sand are drawn, because obviously those are the lines that declare when force can or cannot be used. So,
right. Okay.
You know, it's just applying that objective standard. And then when you've got that, that's when you have a freedom that's completely universalizable as well, because everyone can be equally free under that. I once had someone question whether even those laws would be an infringement of freedom. And I used the example of, like, you know, the law against rape being one example, and saying, well, how can a law against rape be a violation of your freedom unless you think your freedom includes the right to rape people? If you think your freedom includes the right to do what you want, as long as you don't violate other people's same exact right to the same exact freedom, then it's not a violation of your freedom. If you want to take the definition of freedom to extreme terms, to the point, you know, then you might dispute that. But again, this is where clarifying terms and definitions with the words is obviously important.
Yeah, no,
but yeah, sorry.
Okay, yeah, no, a clarification of structure of hierarchy and knowledge and definitions and things like that. And let me give you a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Okay, you're speaking of individual, of voluntarism, of non-aggression, of the recognition of rights, if you want to put it and phrase it that way, and property rights. Problem is that if you take those concepts and not apply them consistently, and I can give you an example of where you can off-rail that, is that if you have a case of elevating open borders as some kind of like anarchist doctrine, then you're not taking a full account of the entire context. Okay, you could say, what right does a person have from the caravan from stopping those people, when the structure in that society where you have this divisions with the president of the United States, it's a real conflict between Trump and the Democrats. That's not like some puppets doing a show in this case. I don't think that whatsoever. There is a conflict where the Democratic where the Demo-rats, as I call them, are looking to fatten their voting base, which in turn fattens the welfare state, which in turn expands expands the state in that capacity. If you just remove all of that and just elevate open borders as if that was an example of the recognition of property rights, to me it can be argued that it is an exact case of the infringement of property rights, because bad enough that we live in a society where Peter has to pay Paul, but now we have Peter and Paul having to pay Muhammad. So I can't see how people don't understand this to be an expansion of state powers. It's absolutely astounding to me that people can't see this.
Well, I can understand the argument that the state's bringing in people, like, for example, if a particular side, like you said, Democrats in America will want to bring in people that are likely to vote for them,
but you see
or what have you.
Open borders, if you take that as some kind of like platonic absolute, you know, can be at odds with property rights.
Well, yeah, but the thing is, I mean, I can't speak for Larkin Rose, but I mean, every sort of time I've heard him speak on the subject, it's pretty similar to what I'm saying now. So I don't necessarily think he's advocating for open state borders, just as I'm not advocating for open state borders. It's more a case of saying we don't recognize state borders as legitimate, therefore oppose the enforcement of those state borders. Therefore, other people could say, well, that's basically open borders. It's like, well, you could say that it's like open borders, but it's more a case of we don't recognize the borders at all. So it's not,
and it's universalized,
or at least in my mind, anyway.
Right? It's universalizable. So would you say, for as not a matter of prepared measure, or not because of greater armaments or privatizing all of the area of Israel right now, with the government right there on principle, should they open their borders yesterday?
Who's this? Israel, you say?
Yeah, Israel.
Well, again, I don't. Yeah, I mean, I suppose. Well, it's not about opening their borders. I mean, like I say, what I'm advocating for is a free society. So the government should be gone. The state violence should be gone. So that would include, obviously, the enforcement of illegitimate borders, state borders, but it also includes all the other things that make immigration a problem, that make migration a problem. I realize that doesn't deal with the issue of defense necessarily directly, but that's something that needs to be dealt with within itself, because you can be attacked from within your country just as much as you can be attacked.
The open border position is that while there is a state there, we're not talking about a free society, because there is, in that society, there is no disagreement between you and me, and this show wouldn't even be aired because it wouldn't exist. We wouldn't be having this conversation. We're having this conversation with a state. Now, if you're saying that state borders is an imposition and a violation of rights, I would agree with that. But your position, therefore, is that while there's a state, open borders, perhaps by de facto or default or whatnot, would be the established case. Is that not a fair representation or understanding of the open border position? Or there is, or maybe we don't have a disagreement then. That would be wonderful if that was the thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would describe it more to say that the existence of the state doesn't change the fact that I don't recognize their borders, and I don't, like I say, we're on the same page in a free society. You say, but what about in this? We're not in a free society. We're in a state society.
But you understand the argument, though, right?
Yeah, no, I understand where you're coming from.
With this, a lot of people having trouble with this.
No, I fully understand what you're. No, I do. I fully understand what you're saying.
The borders, it becomes a moot subject.
Yeah, no, I fully understand what you're saying. I appreciate that.
Open, closed borders, all arguing for an open border. What?
Yeah, no,
what?
Yeah, no, I understand that you're basically saying that, you, like I say, you wouldn't have nothing to do with a state border in a free society. It wouldn't exist, and it would be a non-issue. I understand what you're saying, and I understand that you're quite happy to advocate for the same free society that I'm advocating for, as far as I can tell. I know I haven't gone into every little detail, but basically on the surface, we're both advocating for the same thing. But what you're saying is that within the current paradigm, though, that we live, the state paradigm is a different situation. I'm saying, although it is a different situation with regard, I'm not blind to the implications, but what I'm saying is the voluntarist position, the non-aggression principle consistent position with regards to state borders doesn't change. Just because you've got a welfare state, just because you've got all these reasons why immigration becomes a big problem and why governments may be motivated to do it in an engineered fashion, I don't doubt that for a second, but all of that is just more arguments for why we need to get rid of the government, because they're screwing us royally in every direction, in every angle, in every way. Immigration is just one of many examples of that. But what I'm saying is all of those scenarios doesn't change the fact that it would violate the non-aggression principle to use force to enforce state borders. You can say that, okay, that's basically advocating for open borders. I mean, I'm not attacking it from that position, but yeah, I suppose that is how it defaults. But it's more a case of, because to be clear, just as obviously you don't want to be strawmanned into advocating for closed state borders, I'm certainly not advocating, and as far as I can tell, I don't think the likes of...
want to be. It wouldn't be the case.
Say again, sorry.
By word, yeah, no, because if somebody can say that I'm advocating state borders, it's ridiculous. They're not taking account of my open declaration, my opposing and defying, and denouncing and and indicating that that's not right. I have a whole 10-year cyber history to back it up. So,
but I am accounting for that, and I do understand
borders, right? What?
Yeah, no, but I am accounting for that, and I do understand that, you know, you're not advocating for closed state. You know, I understand your position. I'm not looking to strawman you. I understand that, you know, that you're advocating for a free society. That would be your preference, but your position with regards to this state border.
My only fear now in a free society is these anarchists who make these charges of what kind of justice system we would have if they had any leverage at all. That's what I'm worried about. Now,
how do you mean? Sorry.
Well, yeah. Well, the bulldog and tarred and feathered approach, you know, because I questioned the validity of open borders even before I could even utter a philosophical position in elaboration. I was attacked. What kind of justice is that from the anarchist community?
Well, yeah, I can't.
You wonder why anarchists have cause for concern.
Well, I know
the arguments, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I say, I understand your position, but I think the thing is because one of the things I have seen you say a lot of the times is you've rejected the idea that your position on the state border issue is pragmatism. I've heard you make the argument that
I'm arguing from principle.
Okay, well, could you elaborate on that? Because, and again, perhaps clarify your position with regards to the state borders.
Well, yeah, no, this is another thing. Like this whole, once again, we're getting way off the epistemological rational tracks here. Okay, this is why philosophy is the foundation. Okay, the foundation we have to get back to. Okay, these anarchists who mock and scoff the Western canon, Western civilization, the bedrock of science, rationality, recognition of rights, even with the minarchist argument for a limited government, they made the mistake of thinking that government is some kind of gravitational pull. It's just a metaphysical given. But how can we tame this monster? How we can tame it versus other regions of the world where the state becomes enshrined? You know, you had that, unfortunately, in Europe, softened by the Enlightenment movement, but where you have countries like the Middle East, for Christ's sakes. Don't you understand the epistemological and metaphysical foundation of that state is subjugation to the supernatural? It's statism in action. This has nothing to do with skin color. This has nothing to do with charges of Islamophobia or whatnot. No, but that's another thing that's all problematic is right there. It's like Islam is statism, for Christ's sakes. So the whole idea of the state and this question of open and closed borders, don't you understand, Matt, that it's transient? Somebody gave me an argument on Facebook the other day and said, what are you talking about? Europe doesn't have this open border thing there. You still have to go get passports, and I still had to have this stamped and that stamped to go from Canada or the US to go to France or whatever. So what open border? It's transient and flexible and malleable according to government fiat. There is no principle of an open or a closed borders. They'll make it difficult for white people to get in there or whatnot, or to settle there. And they're opening the floodgates to economic third world migrants. And a great deal of them are very seriously damaged people. And in the name of open borders, I mean, Stefan Molyneux talks about empiricism. You know, he's a philosopher who's tried to get us back down to the basics, which is always philosophy, before you even start to philosophize midstream into politics and whether we should have open or closed borders or not. Political issues. Get back to the philosophy. Get back to the philosophy. Try to indicate that culture matters.
Well, I mean, I don't want to divert the subject.
Where are you going to get a free society with an influx of these third world collectivists where the Democrats are purposefully, demonstratively trying to fatten the voter base. And they're doing it via the government artifact known as immigration. In this case, in the fluency, the Heraclitus flux of open versus closed.
Hey, gentlemen,
through open borders.
Just real quick there, Victor, I just want to offer in there, because I see where both of you are coming from. I think that position where I think you got to bring into the principle versus pragmatism aspect of it, because you guys have both brought that up. And this is somewhere I think that's going to delve into and right into the core, in the heart of this kind of discussion.
Pragmatism. Oh my God.
I once again, I love to allude to scenarios, right? Because then people can visualize and conceptualize that in their head. Is those of us that are principled, and it sounds like both of you gentlemen are very principled. And those are the people that, like I say, initially, if I'm going to deal with people, I want to deal with people that work and function from a basis of some kind of a principle. So I'm very
principle. Yeah,
you guys for that.
A Platonic ivory tower principle.
Well, the problem though is
all throughout any context.
Right, but just like some of the concepts, even some of the collectivist utopias concepts, they no doubt that a lot of them have a lot of good ideas or concepts in their mind, and they just want to strive for that. But once again, the principles are great, like I say, but it's the pragmatism and the approach and how we do it. So I consider a scenario, like if you're someone that's completely against use preemptive force or violence, but it's high time at noon, some guy's getting ready to shoot you. Well, you don't want to wait till the guy's done. My problem is with all of these concepts that we all derive, and like I say, I'm not trying to negate or deny either your guys' position, because I respect both of you. I think both of you made excellent points, but it comes down to, at the end of the day, like you're both kind of somewhat alluding to right now, is we got to be a little bit pragmatic here, because we can hold ourselves to real higher standards, and we can, and I want to do it myself, just like I know both of you gentlemen definitely do, but if we're the ones that are holding ourselves to these super high standards, the people that aren't are the ones that I'm worried about. And that's why the pragmatism kind of has to enter in the equation. I'm wondering what both of you gentlemen think about, if we hold ourselves to this extreme higher moral standard, which, like I say, I want to do it. I love to be able to surround myself with people that I could do it. But what happens if we hold ourselves to these ridiculously high standards of principles, and everyone else says, oh, well, while they're over here, let's take over shit, right? So, like I say, you guys deal with just my premise right there. I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I got some thoughts on that, but I want to give the floor to Matt.
Okay, well, I think I can argue against the enforcement of state borders from both the pragmatism and the principle point of view, but I think it's important to clarify which one we're talking about at any one time. I mean, just you mentioned Stefan Molyneux. I don't want to spend too much time talking about him. I don't have any respect for him as a philosopher anymore. But one of the arguments
the immigration issue, I trust.
Say again, sorry.
Because of the immigration and border issues, I guess, right?
Not just that. He's taken a nosedive in a lot of areas, in my opinion. But
show, I guess, I don't know.
I mean, like I said, I don't want to divert the subject to talking about him, but I mean, we could always talk about him another time if you wanted to arrange a conversation to talk about the many flaws of Stefan Molyneux. But one of the arguments that I heard him make, and I don't know if this is your position, you can obviously tell me if it is, but one of the arguments I heard him make, and this is why I think it's important to clarify whether you're making a pragmatic argument or a principled argument, because although I still kind of have the same position either way, my argument is different depending on which position you're speaking on. If you're speaking about a pragmatic point of view of saying, look, in the long run, it would get us closer to a free society, or be more, we'll have a more NAP compliant society if we do this little bit of NAP violating now of, using state violence to enforce borders and immigration and what have you, which pretty much
makes a positive case for the borders and Trump and whatnot.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I don't want to straw man him, but from what I understand, he basically kind of made the case that the immigrants are aggressing, that it's that it would be defensive force to enforce borders, in the context of obviously taxation and all of that sort of stuff. I mean, I reject that completely. The immigrants aren't aggressing, passing over like I say, these arbitrary lines are not acts of aggression. And although I understand and appreciate the problems, why immigration is problematic with regards to the situation with taxation and what have you, my point is, and will remain, that's the crime. Walking over a border is not a crime. What our government does to us is a crime. And yes, they're bringing in more people that are going to vote that way, and that are perhaps even more more embracing of statism. That may well be true, but like I say, that for me smells like a pragmatic argument. Because the argument is basically saying, well, okay, for the long term, you know, to take a pragmatic approach, we want to bend or break this principle. If you're saying that you don't think we are bending or breaking this principle, and it's actually perfectly consistent within the non-aggression principle to enforce state borders because of, you know, the statist paradigm that we live in, then obviously I disagree with that. So I do disagree on both fronts, but I think it's important to clarify which we're talking about, because, like I say, I've heard Stefan Molyneux try to make the argument that, you know, not just the pragmatic argument, but also saying that it's somehow within the non-aggression principle to advocate for state violence to be used against people crossing an arbitrary line. I mean, I reject that entirely. I don't know if that's your position, but certainly something I've heard him say. Well,
there's been a lot of, obviously there's a lot of alignment between myself and Molyneux on a great strain of this. I think where we probably are differing is that it's not an opinion. It's an established fact that he has made the case for Trump, because he regards him. He doesn't buy into this whole thing of him being a part of the puppet regime, that he's actually a threat to the powers that be and whatnot, and that with the election of somebody keeping the perpetration of the Obama legacy intact fully in the person of Hillary, became a pragmatic situation, because it would have made plunged us into a worse disaster. But he would argue that even if Trump does in fact represent a lesser evil, does he argue that therefore that legitimizes the state? Maybe this thing can work out after all. No, it just means that it's slowing the foot to the pedal approach towards statism, and great or increased statism. And Trump happened to be some unprecedented exception to the rule, because he truly is an outsider to this paradigm. But he can be faulted on the fact that here is somebody that still wants to control over an entire nation of people. That's where the statism is inherent into this situation. And there was a lot of anarchists. It was even Josh Sigurdsson, for Christ's sakes, a purist extraordinaire these days, apparently, was ultimately rooting that in a scenario where one will get in power, plotted the fact that it was Trump over Hillary. But does that therefore mean that he becomes therefore a statist, and now he's reverted his entire stance on everything he said previous in regards to anarchism? No, of course not. It's not a crime. It's not an intellectual crime to make an evaluation between A and B while still retaining the principle. You understand that, right?
Yeah, I understand that. And I mean, Walter Block's made the argument that, if a bunch of slaves were being asked to vote for two different slave masters, one whipped them slightly less, are they suddenly advocating for their own slavery because they vote for the one that whips them less? No, they're obviously making the pragmatic decision. It's that lesser argument, that lesser evil argument that Stefan Molyneux ironically used to deride, that he now seems to embrace with regards to the Trump thing. I mean, even if he's right about
Trump, just to interject this one thing, I do want to hear what you have to say. But even in there, like the ultimate, what I was getting at before, the ultimate difference is that I had a live debate with Walter Block on Josh Sigurdsson's World Alternative Media, arguing to boycott the vote altogether, whereas he was making the case for libertarians for Trump. That was his position. And I just thought, I'll stick to principle. I'm an anarchist. I'm going to advocate a boycott of the vote altogether. you know, right there on the strain of the whole of the areas of where I agree with Larkin Rose. He's got a very theatrical way of putting, reducing very complicated philosophical principles and making it entertaining. But in the sense of identifying it really, truly as a belief system, it's just a belief system that these people have any legitimacy. They're just human beings like you and me. You strip of you strip the kernel of his clothing and the suit and the ties, and we're just all naked mouses in the field, you know, for Christ's sakes. You know, what gives a person an inherent right to rule over somebody else? And it's theater. It's just kabuki blood theater, for Christ's sakes. It's all nonsense, right? And that's all well and good, but
this is why it's important.
My rambling thoughts there, but go ahead. Sorry.
That's right. No, sorry. I mean, but this is why it's important to clarify. I mean, like I say, I can argue with regards to the pragmatic argument as well as the principled one. But like, for example, the lesser evil argument, or, you know, like things like that, it's a pragmatic argument. You're saying, right, well, we'll violate principles now in the hope that we'll be in a better position.
No. This is where I got the problem. I completely reject the premise that the only example of a violation of rights is when the state closes its borders. It does that, but you can't say therefore, because that's a clear example of a violation of rights, and it is. Therefore, you have to open the borders, and only violence is a result when you have closed borders. I argue against that. No, it also can entail the opening of a borders, giving within a specific context, such as if you have things that make the open border made further laws possible because of an open door policy. It plunged us further into statism, where you have anti-hate speech laws, where you do have an increased burden of the welfare state, where you in fact do have cases of where the media is being bought off to be through a Trudeau flush fund here in Canada, to make the media more compliant to the dictates and to the policies of open borders. It plunges further into statism. So the whole thing with the Trump phenomena basically is that the argument comes down to this, that you can have a measures of evil, for Christ's sake. So what constitutes bad to worse? You can make this evaluation. But it doesn't mean violating principles.
And let Matt answer there, Victor.
Yeah,
okay.
you can, but the thing is like, I mean, like, let's put it this way. I mean, I live in England. I'd much rather live in England than Saudi Arabia, and from a measure of statism and authoritarianism, or however you want to label the opposite to voluntarism as, that Saudi Arabia is obviously a lot further away than England is. But neither are free societies. Both are oppressive regimes infringing my basic rights and freedom. So although I fully appreciate that not all things are equal. Not all non-aggression principle violations are equal. But a non-aggression principle violation is still a non-aggression principle violation. Rape is worse than theft, but they're both crimes. You know, so it's like, I mean, this is why I say a lot of the argument with regards to enforcing the borders within the statist paradigm do seem to be mainly a pragmatic one. I mean, like I say, I can argue against that, because I also think that the problem is, it's all very well saying, well, if we let more people come in that are of a statist mindset and of this sort of culture or whatever, that's going to get us further away from a free society and bring us more statism. There may well be some legitimacy to that. But the problem is you can't put people into group identities. You can't, you can't say, right, well, you're immigrants or you're Mexicans or whatever you are, and therefore you have less right to walk over this line that's not even a legitimate property rightfully owned line of private property, any more than we do. You know, like I say, that though I do appreciate that there are complexities to this, and though I do appreciate the kind of, looking ahead and saying, well, yes, but we need to sort of do this and that. The problem is once you open the door up to that, people can start talking about, well, we need a bit of welfare because if people get so desperate, then crime's going to come up, and then you'll see a lot more NAP violations, or if we don't start providing people healthcare, then they might start doing desperate things. I'm not saying I'm making those arguments. I'm just saying that once you allow the principle to be violated, and I do maintain that it is violated when enforcing state borders or any kind of state violence, anything that's not acceptable, anything that's not acceptable in a free society.
Yeah.
Because it's a violation of the non-aggression principle is not acceptable now because it's a violation of the non-aggression principle.
Hey, Matt, can I just point out, because I agree with a lot of what you said, but wouldn't we also be able to entail and encompass the personal responsibility aspect of, because I agree with you as far as like, you know, someone like, perfect example, let's say a neighbor of mine had someone from a different country and they wanted to bring them here and sponsor them and help them to, you know, create a new life for themselves. Because, hey, like I say, it doesn't matter if you live domestically in the country I live or anywhere around the world. Yeah, you probably have had to suffer some oppression from the state at some point in time. So my heart goes out to those people. But that also requires a sense of personal responsibility and accountability, right? So just like what Matt's suggesting here, yes, people like, you know, that want to bring someone to Canada being oppressed by some regime in a foreign place, of course they should have the right to do. But that's, once again, this is the problem that the state is actually creating a problem between you and Victor. It's not, as far as I understand, you guys are great people. The state is causing both having to be seemingly have to take these weird stances that are whether you're trying to come at it from the principle or pragmatic approach, is the state's creating all the problems, because Matt's suggesting, of course, people should, and I think Victor would even, of course, but here's the problem: is the state is the ultimate arbiter now that gets to determine and decide, you know, pick winners or losers. This is ultimately the problem with central planning. So I think at the end of the day, at the end of this discussion, even I think both of you will be able to walk away and say the state is not the final solution for these kinds of problems, right?
All that, Bennett, just for clarification's sake, I do not recognize any or approach this matter as a principle versus pragmatism. I'm arguing strictly from principle, and that's it. My whole case.
I get that, Victor. I really do, and trust me, I know you. You're a great guy. That's why I always talk to you all the time. The problem is though, and I'm the same kind of guy. I would love to function only. It definitely works in a utopian sense, because there's people that we know, every one of us realize that not. So, like I say, here's the problem with whether it's Stephen Molyneux, myself, you, or Matt, or the more we put forth, and I'm not even saying this to myself, believe me, is the more we hold ourselves to these very good conceptual standards, very principled standards, is the people that mine. They're relying on us that we're willing to, just, I think back in the days, remember when the British and all of them, they'd go to war and they let the opponents fire off cannons. Yeah, look at how principled I am standing here. Oh yeah, watch while your head gets fucking lobbed off. You're not going to be much good after that, are you? Well, that's good for you that you took that principled approach. But anyways, like I say, I'm just offering a little food for thought here for you guys, because as far as I understand from this conversation, is you're both coming at it from. What's that? Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, you guys run with it, man. I just wanted to create a little thought.
We all agree in the abstract of what of the principles. We all agree what the principle constitutes non-aggression. Okay, non-aggression. Yeah. What we're talking about, where the differences can reside, is in the identification of the application or interpretation of the principles, or the application of those abstract principles. Now, if the whole idea of the non-aggression principle is as an ethical standard for the betterment of the world, for the decreasement of aggression in the world, then it becomes in question whether open borders is achieving that.
But that's utilitarian argument. That's not principle. That's, you're like, I might be able to come to you with a model of socialism, not voluntary socialism, forced state socialism. And let's say I can come to you with one that can give you a net better world. Like I can say, look, we're taking people's freedoms away. It's statism, but we're going to do it in such an ingenious way that most people are going to be happy. Some people will be the same. Virtually no one will be worse off. That's a utilitarian argument. That's basically saying it will be better in the long run if we compromise our principles here, here, and here. My point is, and like I say, just perhaps clarify to me what part of my position you think I've got wrong with regards to the principle. Because obviously I'm saying, like I say, I know we're on the same page in a free society. I'm saying my position on state borders doesn't change just because even though we're in a state society. It's the same position. It's illegitimate. It's now you're saying that you're within principle. So where's the non-aggression principle allowing for enforcement of state border? Because I don't see how it can.
Okay, yeah. How can a state border? Are you attributing that position to me?
No, but what I'm saying. Well, no, but I'm asking you to clarify your position with regards to how it differs from mine. You know, because I'm saying, like I say, we're on the same page in a free society, but we don't live in a free society. We live in a statist one. That's where we differ. Now, where is it? Can you just perhaps clarify that difference within? You know, okay, why is it a principal position?
Yeah, no, let's take it from the ground up. Let's take it from the ground up. Okay, we both agree that would you agree with the following statement that at the end of the day, freedom of movement, which for me is just a very vague, obtuse, nebulous concept that could be stretched in a lot of different ways, but, you know, freedom of movement, I don't know, like freedom to dance, I don't know, freedom to walk across the street. Yeah, I guess there's freedom of movement. You want to entail that to include the caravan, but in all contexts. But one thing that we can speak and objectively and universally apply definitely is property rights. Now, do you agree that freedom of movement doesn't trump property rights? Yes. In fact, that there are borders, if we want to use like the lexicon terminology of state dialogue, borders. I mean, there are borders that's determined by individual property owners that they have, and they open and close their borders. That becomes fluid and within a context. One could represent something very evil, and you can't have the crook who breaks into the home invasion and claim freedom of movement, right? Right.
No,
yeah. So I think you have that. No, but even with the existing paradigm, just to finish off here, now, even within the existing paradigm, the issue of freedom of movement becomes rather a nebulous and dangerous concept if applied as something to trump property rights. And we have to ask the question if property rights, in fact, are being greater infringements are being made upon the host population of Western societies because of government permission granted fiat open borders. Now, does open borders still represent the good?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, how does property rights apply to national borders? Property rights applies to private property. I recognise borders for rightfully owned private property, but my point is those are the only borders that I recognise as legitimate. So therefore, they're the only borders that we can use violence to enforce and stop people crossing. And they're being egregiously
violated.
Say again, sorry.
They're being egregiously violated in Western countries by third world migrants, economic migrants. Those property rights are being egregiously violated.
How so? Can you elaborate?
If you have refugees even and state orchestrated migrants upon sitting on the welfare state as they are, getting a greater amount of the benefits that even the host population citizens are getting, whether it be through welfare payments or retirement funds or pensions and whatnot, are living higher on the hog than those people. The host population is responsible for the entire wealth of that nation, which is being plunged, as I say, has nothing to do with skin color. But the fact of the matter is the greater furtherance into statism is a result of not only did Peter have to pay Paul in a welfare state, now Peter and Paul are paying Muhammad. And such a commentary has nothing to do with skin tones. Nothing.
Okay, but if I can just jump.
Property rights.
If I can just jump on that metaphor, though, about Peter paying Paul and now Peter's got to pay Muhammad. But what I'm saying is, who's making Peter pay Paul and Peter pay Muhammad? The same person. So it doesn't really matter if I'm Peter and I'm being made to pay for Paul or Muhammad or James or John or whoever else. My point is my focus isn't on them. My focus is on the people that are actually robbing me. You know, if someone, I mean, imagine you just lived in like the Wild West and some guy was walking into town, or no, you were walking, you were traveling, and someone came up to you and says, no, we're not going to let you come into this area because there's a thief who robs us all and gives it to anybody that comes into this area. I'd say, well, take it up with the thief. That's nothing to do with me. My point is immigration. Immigrants are not aggressing against you. Your government is aggressing against you. And the fact that they use immigration to compound that.
You think you're making a point, but the point becomes moot when I'd say that, of course, the ultimate perpetrator is the state, for Christ's sakes. Doesn't mean that the migrants are necessarily morally not so culpable in the sense that they know where the expenses are coming from and that they're living on the hog. I mean, and if they're that illiterate, if they're that illiterate, no wonder that they're indentured dependents.
Well, there's two responses to that. I mean, there's one, even if I accepted the premise that migrants that are intentionally coming over here.
Can you can you, Matt?
Say again, sorry, mate. Hello? I think we've lost Bennett.
Uh-oh. I guess he's just dialing up again, but go ahead.
Oh, right, okay. I forgot what I was saying now. What was I saying?
We're still trying to retain to keep the principle, but not just in the abstract, to find out where there are violations of it and what constitute a violation of it and what policy is catering to that greater than the other, let's say, whether it's a.
Okay, yeah, I remember what I was saying. Yeah, I mean, basically what I'm saying is there's two things to say. I mean, one, even if I accepted the premise that immigrants that are coming over here and knowingly to take welfare and what have you, one problem with the whole border issue is that there's no way to magically screen those out, you know, from the people that have better intentions, that are going to be either a net benefit or don't have the intentions to just, you know, take what is essentially stolen money. But so that's one thing that kind of, I think, does sort of, you know, make that not an argument for the, you know, for the border. But also, I would actually reject the notion that even those people are aggressing against you. As I say, the person robbing you is still
remember who you're debating with when you say this and that would not make the case for the border. You got to remember who your opponent is.
Yeah, sorry, I know.
Because you might have a case to make against Lawrence Southern, right?
Okay, yeah, all right. Well, what I'm saying is immigrants aren't aggressing against you. Not just the ones that are coming over here and not take. But I mean, like I said, I even would reject.
You know, moral culpability is one thing. What I'm saying is that open and closed borders, it's government fiat. There's no principles to be derived from this. Okay, let me do this. I don't know your marital status or whatever, but can I construct a girlfriend and you have let's say a 10-year-old daughter? Can I do that to make my?
If you want, yeah. As long as she's hot.
No, she's hot and you love her. There's no problems here. You love them equally. You're very happy of your family. Okay, now. Just go with the scenario and forget about. I tried to do this with Patrick Smith at one time, and he went off on some ramble thing. When I would do this, we got guns in Texas. You're dealt with the matter of somebody breaks and enters into your home, a home invasion. There's 3 thugs there. Okay, they mean business. They are nasty people. They are. I'll give you an example of just how evil these people are. And I'll lead up to the point of why I'm drawing out this very horrific example. Just bear with me if you gentlemen will indulge me and humor me. Okay, these gentlemen these thugs rather break into your home. They're fucking evil. They there's nothing that you can do about it. They're armed to the fucking teeth. There's 3 of them. Okay, they got kung fu up the ass as well. And basically the degree of their evil is such that They point a gun to your daughter's head, and they point a gun to your head. They point a gun to your wife's head. They ask you, you have to make a choice right now, and you have to do it within 5 seconds. I don't want a fucking philosophical soliloquy from you. You have 5 seconds to answer the question. We're going to blow. You have to choose between your daughter and your wife. And if you don't answer the question, you all die. I'll shoot you all. I'm going to let you go, but you have to make a choice. Your wife or your daughter. 5 seconds. Answer it. You're dead. So you're all dead. You're all dead. Now tell me from that situation, where does the ethical principle reside? What would have been the ethical thing to done under such a scenario? And this is coming back to the borders. Trust me.
Well, okay, yeah, I'll be interested to see how that does tie back to borders. But I mean,
what have you done? What was the ethical thing to do?
I don't think that in situations like that, I don't think there's a moral choice, because the choice has basically been taken from you. You could pick any one, and I don't think anyone could say it was moral or immoral, because, like I say, if someone puts a gun to your head and makes you make an impossible decision, I don't think there's a moral choice there, and I don't think it's even your. I don't think it's even your choice.
No. You don't have to elaborate, because here's another example of where we agree. I can't believe the agreements that are just mounting up here. We agree. There's no principle to apply. Now I'm going to bring this back to the state and the question of the borders. Okay, both scenarios violates rights. There's no principle to be derived. This is not a matter of pragmatism versus principles. This is a stateless society with no centralized hierarchical force that is making a complete hash of ethical decisions, where it's dividing us on this issue. Do you see the horror and the false dichotomies that the thugs who broke into your home put you into? That situation is the exact same situation on a macro scale. There is no principle to be derived on the issue of open versus closed borders. Both violate rights. When there's a government in place and they open their borders to third world migrants with political agendas such as fattening their voter base, or because they could engage in some kind of multicultural fantasy like our own soy boy Trudeau is. He's an ideological fucknut who's imposing this multiculturalism, open society, George Soros funded open border policy upon us. Violations of rights abound when there's a state there. Open versus closed borders is a false dichotomy. I'm not making a pragmatic argument. I'm making a principled argument that ethics can only apply where choice is involved. And the home invaders gave you no choice. There was no chance for right to come from that. You could not have said, well, the ethical choice intrinsically was open border my daughter.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, but like I say, the problem is I mean, yes, a government invites a load of people to come over and live on your dime, as you say, through your taxpayers, and that is a criminal situation. But those same immigrants come over not on your dime, and it's not a criminal situation. So my point is, and I understand where you're coming from, but say again, sorry.
Exactly, another violation of rights. Do you know that there's an acquaintance of mine, a Japanese girl?
Hold on there, Victor. I've just taken myself out of the video because it's getting a little bit laggy now, but I just wanted to let Matt finish.
I don't know if we wanted to summarize. Do we have any questions from the people? Because we did advertise Q&A or.
Yeah, I'm going to look at them here in a bit, but I just wanted to let let Matt finish his response to you. Yeah. And the reason why you're not seeing me right now, because like I say, the video is getting really, really laggy for some stupid reason. So I'm trying to take my video side of it, so we're not using up the broadband, hopefully.
Yeah.
But go ahead, Matt. Sorry, man.
Yeah, it's fine. No, I mean, like I say, just to sort of reiterate and clarify my position. I mean, basically what I'm saying is the crime involved with regards to the immigration situation, where governments bring in immigrants to, you know, to live off your dime, as you say, through taxation and welfare and all the other things that may come their way when they get citizenship, the power to vote, additional state powers and what have you.
Yeah.
Although I appreciate all of that, the simple fact remains that the criminals is the government's robbing you. The crime is them robbing you. Somebody walking past this border is not a crime. It's not an act of an act of aggression. So there's no in my view, there's no principled argument for saying that we should stop people from crossing this border.
Fair enough.
That's basically my position. And I'm still not understanding it, and perhaps you can sort of clarify. I'm still not understanding where the principled argument comes from, because, you know, like I said, I fully agree when you say that, you know, it's wrong that when they bring these over, but the problem is that doesn't pertain to immigration. That pertains to the crime that is government itself. I mean, yeah. Sorry, when I say it doesn't pertain to immigration, I mean it doesn't pertain exclusively to immigration. That is a crime of government itself. The governments are robbing us. Of course, they're going to do a great deal, many things to consolidate their power, to make it more difficult for us to untangle.
And sometimes they do that through open borders.
I'm not saying they don't.
The audience, though, at this point.
I actually get completely where Matt's coming from there. The only hypothetical that come to my mind at that point in time is actually back when I was a younger man. And actually, I remember my parents and someone were trying to sell them a bicycle to my mother. Neither one had anything to do with the theft, but I have to kind of at least interject a little bit there, just offer my own. I know I'm just the moderator here, but if you're a recipient of the proceeds of theft, you didn't arbitrarily, or, you know, you weren't the person that initiated that theft, which is why I don't think anyone here, Victor or Matt or myself, would ever try to point the fingers at the recipients of that theft, because they're just benefactors, people that are benefiting from that. But you know, I think it is still, we still should even hold some of the immigrants to at least a somewhat quasi moral standard, to the point where at least, if you acknowledge that the place you're going, the reason why you may benefit in some way economically or socially is because someone's giving you a favor, like government.
Even after they've committed crimes, they're still not. They have this whole Democrats in office with the sanctuary cities and things like that. I mean, they're still.
Well, yeah, but I just want to make sure that we're not pointing. Yeah. No, I just want to make sure to clarify that I know that neither you gentlemen are necessarily pointing towards like the people that are coming to these countries, like through the legal or illegal means, because I'm sure those are people that are just fleeing persecution themselves. But like I say, if we're going to have any kind of moral principles or standards, we kind of got to hold everyone to them. This is once again that fight, that battle between principles and pragmatism is because we all recognize that not everyone's going to hold themselves to that standard. Is who are we willing to sacrifice? I guess at the end of the day, who are we always willing to sacrifice at this altar of benevolence and you know, higher morality and ethics? Well, it's good for those of us that are willing to do so. But what I've seen over the culmination of my life is those of us that are willing to keep holding ourselves to these standards are the ones that are trampled on. Anyways, I just want to interject that and let you guys, like I say, just run with I'm just offering some food for thought here once again.
Okay. I just try not to strain the attention span of the audience where we have advertised Q&A. It doesn't mean we can't go back to a convo if it warranted. But it's like, can we consider that?
Okay, well, I will look and see. Yeah, the only reason why I wasn't looking, like I say, because every time I tried to open up another social media page, you guys were cutting out more. So I don't know if it's the.
Oh, okay. You know
what I mean? But I'm going to go look at it now and see what we got here. See if we got some questions. Actually, I'd have. And
I'll give the floor to Matt while doing so, because I spoke at length, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what else I can sort of say. I mean, you know, I mean, I hope I've sort of clarified my position, and like I say, I am sympathetic to the concerns with regards to immigration. And I'm not blind to the various problems. And I'm also don't doubt when you talk about the intent behind the government in bringing these people in and the way that they can sort of
consolidate. Well, your country in the UK has been plagued by some peppery examples of incursions, I could say, you know, and so have we. It's the beginning rumbles of what's to come has already taken place.
Yeah, and I mean, I say the same thing to people over here that sort of, that, you know, that want to talk to me about. I mean, obviously, a big subject is obviously with regards to Muslim immigration. I get a lot of people trying to give me scare stories about the impending Sharia law and what have you. I mean, and one of my points I make to them
say that in a laughing way. You say that in a laughing way. I'd like to pick up on that, but
okay. Well, just finish my point quick. One of the things I like to say to them, because they often say, well, you know, do you want Sharia law in this country? And I'm like, no, of course I don't, because Sharia law is fascist law. It's, you know, nat violation through and through. But my opposition to it is nothing to do with it being, you know, Muslim or foreign or whatever, because my opposition to it is exactly the same as my opposition to the existing fascist laws that we have in this country already that are enshrined into Western culture. Yeah, we might have it better. We might not have it as bad, but the fact of the matter is
make an evaluation.
Those laws exist right now. Sharia law doesn't exist right now, but drug laws, gambling laws, taxation, that all exists right now. So that's why I personally consider that a bigger concern. That's why I try to point to people to say, why are you worrying about a fascist law that might come in if we get enough people of that culture to bring it in, when we've already got fascist laws that you don't give two monkeys about? You know, it's kind of,
if you don't want to go from bad to worse. That's why that would be your concern, I think. Do you have like a Islamic party there in the UK? The Islamic UK?
I honestly don't know. I don't concern myself with political parties or religious parties, so I wouldn't know.
No, I said, is there a party, such a party? That's what I'm asking. I'm not saying.
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, now in Ontario, we do have the Islamic Party of Ontario.
Yeah, I mean, but again, I mean, and this is what I say. I mean, this is the problem with having a government. This is a problem with being under rule. People will vie to control that power.
When you government rule too. Yeah.
Say again, sorry.
Sharia law is also a government dictate.
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm not advocating for it in any way. I mean, it's terrible, and it's probably worse than what we've already got. But my point is we don't already have it. But the laws that I do have a problem with, we do already have.
The other is not to argue for the other, though, right? I mean,
oh no, I'm not arguing for the other. I'm just saying when people want to talk to me about you know, prioritizing, I don't think it's a bit more important that we fight Sharia law. And I'm thinking, well, no, I think it's a bit more important that we fight the current existing laws.
The wall in the United States would be privately funded. Just please.
Sorry, say again.
I wish it was such that the freedom that the citizens to be allowed would be to privately fund the wall.
Okay, well, actually, I'd like to make a point on that actually as well, because. And this relates to the immigration thing and the border thing, but it's a little bit of a general thing with regards to
the government, that is, against the Democratic faction.
Say again, sorry.
Yeah, to privately fund a wall in defense against the government, the Democratic faction.
Well, like I say, the only wall or fence or borders that we can have are for rightfully owned private property. So I would reject a state border, whether it was private
wall. I know, but you understand how people are making like an intrinsic case against the wall. Doesn't context matter? Doesn't it matter? Doesn't context matter if you have a welfare state and third world migration? Context.
It doesn't make it any less immoral.
Yeah, but remember, I've established through the home invasion that the moral principle can't be derived from either open or a closed border. They're derivative issues.
Yeah, but I don't think this is equitable to that example.
You didn't appreciate that well-formulated.
Well, I understand the point you're making with that example, but I don't think that transposes to the issue of immigration and borders. I don't think we've got that same scenario. I mean, like I say, I just want to make this quick point.
Can I ask you a question? I do want to hear what you say. Let me ask you a question. Yeah. Let's say let's to play like real, instead of like crossword puzzles to challenge ourselves intellectually. Let's really go for some philosophical enchilada. How about you make the argument of what the possible, in this specific context, I'm not talking about like immigration in a broad brush stroke of prior to the welfare state and when the founding of the United States, and people came from you know, from primarily Western Europe and whatnot, you know, and that was freedom of movement, and that was all well and good. I'm talking about like in the specific context now, what arguments can you make about the welfare state and third world migrants converging upon such a society? I mean, you can't think of like actual examples of where because if you're an interested voluntarist, compassionate person, I think you would be seriously interested in the facts of the matter. You can't think of what's have you heard of nothing of what's going on through
I mean, yeah, no, I fully understand the problems it's caused. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, like what would your arguments be? You know, like if you were to argue on that side.
Okay, well, my argument would be that virtually all of the problems associated with immigration, and I'm not blind to them. I realize, you know, I accept a lot of what you're saying about the ways in which immigration is problematic and the open border policy and what have you. But my argument is it's only problematic because of the state violence that we already have. Like the problems with regards to Mexican immigrants and the criminal gangs and stuff like that. If you want to solve that problem, end the drug war. That would do it a lot more effectively than building a wall or any kind of immigration policy, the ending the drug war. So again, I mean, this is another example. It's like, even from a pragmatic point of view or a principle point of view, whichever way you want to slice it, when people come to me and say, well, you know, immigration is a threat to freedom, you know, long term or what have you, I'm saying, well, it's only a threat because of the government hold that it has on you. And we could solve it without endorsing government violence, without endorsing the enforcement of an illegitimate border. We could actually just, I mean, like I say, ending the drug war would be far more effective to solving most of the problems that people talk about with regards to the border, that this wall, and also, rather than having to spend all this money on a wall, tax money, stolen money again, rather than having to spend all this money on a wall, or even if it were privately funded, which, you know, isn't going to happen, but even if that would happen, it would still be immoral. But what I'm saying, rather than doing that, and rather than having more sort of state violence because of this situation, we could remove a piece of state violence, i.e. the drug law, and that would have a far bigger impact on all of the problems that anyone would cite that immigration causes.
Yeah, no. Actually, look, what's going to happen or not in regards to a privately funded wall during a statist society is, of course, in question, though. But ultimately, I would just argue that we got the Canadian Libertarian coming back. No, I would just argue that ultimately, my principled position is the privatization of every square inch. I go with Walter Block, full hog, when he says, if it moves or if it doesn't move, privatize it. Since everything either moves or doesn't move, privatize it all. So
I've actually got some pushback on that, actually.
Yeah, and if all of a southern border, which is now known as the United States of America, in an anarchist society, if it was ever to take place, you know, if that entire stretch of land was bought up and such a person decided to construct such a wall, and if all the lands of port, the privately owned airports, decided not to accommodate certain people from abroad, that would entirely be their basis, as long as it was universally as applied to that geographical area of the non-aggression principle and property rights fully in charge. That's the only type of border that I would advocate. Privatize.
I would actually go against that as well, actually. I do have a bit of pushback. I mean, I spoke to Walter about his idea of privatizing everything. And I actually think that he's already laid down the principal foundation for why you cannot privatize everything. And it actually, and I think I remember you speaking to Walter about this when he spoke about, and we touched on it earlier, about the fact that I can't build a donut-shaped, ring-shaped property around your property and trap you where you are. I can't do that. I can build, even if every square inch of that area that I'm homesteading is homesteadable, you know, even if I could, you know, I could build my house there, and I could build my house there, and I could build my house there, but I can't build one that goes all the way around you and infringes on your, you know, your right to travel freely. Are we on the same page on that?
Well, yeah, no, continue. I mean,
yeah, okay. I mean, Walter's made this point himself.
I hate these what I can consider to be like flagpole arguments, though. You know,
how do you mean?
Well, they're like intellectual masturbation. Well, what if somebody wanted to build a circle? And what if, would you violate somebody's property rights if you were hanging?
Well, no, but it's just to establish the principle. I mean, obviously, I'll extrapolate it to a more real world example, but it's just to establish the principle. You know, it's not likely that someone's going to build a big device that would block out the sun. But the point is, we can still talk about that hypothetical to establish the principle that it would be a nat violation for someone to block out the sun, because we all have a right to that naturally provided resource, and no one has the right to deny it to us. They're not obligated to provide it to us either, but you know, where it's naturally available, they don't have the right to deny it to us. Just like, and again, like I say, I realize it's not feasible, but just to establish the principle, just to establish that property rights, in addition to being defined by the non-aggression principle, is also restricted by the non-aggression principle. And you're free to own property as long as that property doesn't infringe on my rights. And for that reason,
a privatization that Walter is suggesting of an entire geographical stretch of landmass known as a country, if you want to call it that, because I do think that anarchism will never see the day of a global anarchism. But by the way, in regards to a joke I had about that, of like elevating open borders to a Platonic principle, where you had a world government and all the anarchists were saying, yeah, but at least there's no borders. It's like, because one's been elevated above the other, right? Like,
yeah. No, I mean, I'm certainly not going to fall down that.
But but what do you see as problematic with because would not a voluntarist anarchist society entail the universalization, at least of that patch of land, of property rights? Wouldn't that be a complete privatization? The private individuals, private property.
Well, no, because as I say, I don't think property rights actually allows for the privatization of everything. And the reason why I invoked the example of, like I say, the non-aggression principle does restrict property rights. It defines it and restricts it. And the reason I gave the example,
the border issue, though.
Well, I was going to extrapolate that, but the reason why I gave the example of I can't build a property around yours and entrap you that way was just to give an example of where my right to build isn't limitless. I still have to consider whether I'm violating somebody else, and exclusion is a non-aggression principle violation. I mean, Walter Block made this point himself when he made the example of saying, and also he said it's not just a case of building a donut-shaped property around your property. If I'd done that round unowned property, I'm still violating the non-aggression principle, because I don't have a right to exclude people from anything other than my rightfully owned property. That's the only thing I have that right to do. So what I'm saying is so for that reason, you couldn't privatize everybody, because you'd still have to allow people right of way. It doesn't go to the extreme ridiculousness of an anarcho-communist who says you can't build a house because I might have to deviate and I can't walk in an exact straight line. You don't have to go to those extremes. But when you get to the other end of the extreme of saying, well, yeah, but that does mean that you can't completely prevent me from moving. It's one thing to make me deter slightly. It's like when I was using the example of the difference between me standing in the middle of the field and you wanting to walk in a straight line. You can walk around me. I'm not stopping you. But if I was to, or if a load of us all formed the line and actually prevented you from going wherever, then we are violating the non-aggression principle. So a privately paid for national border would be a violation of the non-aggression principle as well. And that's also the same reason why you cannot privatize everything. I mean, apart from the fact that it wouldn't be feasible to privatize things like lakes and rivers and rainforests, because for one thing, the homesteading requirements to attain rightful ownership through creation would mean that you would have to pretty much destroy those areas to separate them from nature enough for you to have homesteaded them. But also, if you privatize every square inch of this planet, then you basically create a quasi-state, because the property rights you have to infringe rules, like for example, if I invite you into my house, I can say you've got to take your shoes off. Now that's not me introducing a law. You don't have to take your shoes off when you're outside of my house, but in my house, as part of the agreement to invite you into my house, I can attach whatever rules I want. That's a right that property owners have. If the entire world was owned, then there would be no escape from the arbitrary rules of property owners, which would basically make them no different essentially from laws, because there's no choice involved. You're not consenting to them as part of an invitation. You'd be infringing on people's right to move, and as I say, you wouldn't be able to do it with natural resources and maintain those natural resources, because homesteading requires separating from nature and mixing your labor.
Yeah, well, I think there might be some problems with the concepts and the definition here then, because certainly if you have a fully free society in the sense of where aggression is recognized as a crime, and a network of a multitude of coupling into the millions of people making decisions on voluntary basis, you have the manifestation of privatization in a free market. I mean, how do you separate the elbow from the arm which it contains? You know, I don't.
Well, I'm not arguing against privatization. What I'm saying is you can have private property, you can build your house, but you can't do it in a way that infringes on others.
You can't privatize everything. Like I'm thinking you don't understand what that means. The privatization just means the multitude of voluntary people interacting with each other on a voluntary basis, not in the area of personal relationships and business relationships, product and trade, and so forth. That would have to entail privatization. That in the only definition that an anarchist or a libertarian scholar would understand.
Okay, I see what you're saying. To clarify what I'm saying, what I mean is yeah, I agree. The only legitimate ownership is private ownership. But what I'm saying is
well, that's a voluntary society.
Yeah. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, I'm saying people can still own, private property. But what I'm saying is the right to own private property doesn't extend to the point where you're infringing on others. You see what I'm saying? There's still a limit to what you can do with your property. Just like there's a limit to what you can do with yourself. Like the same rules that apply to your property apply to you. You can do what you want as long as you're not infringing on other people's rights to do the same thing.
Yeah, but property rights doesn't mean do as you will. I don't understand what the problem is.
Both of you gentlemen have actually, I think, basically pointed out, I don't know why you don't recognize, but you're both saying the exact same thing here, actually. Yeah, you both are recognizing the fact that there's private property and there's constraints and restraints within the concept of having private property. So I don't even think you actually have to try to argue your point. Okay, well, just to clarify, you guys are basically coming at it from the exact same angle. So I just wanted to intervene here now, though, just to point out. So I got the YouTube video up on the back screen. There's been lots of comments, but most of them are comments. I did put out there if people wanted to ask the question. But I just wanted to ask you guys how far. Like, I don't care. Like I say, I'll give you as much time as you need. You got 8 hours on these kind of live.
That's why I was trying to get some feedback.
I'm not looking to go 8 hours, but like I say, I'm not trying to shut anyone down.
You're filibustering.
I might need a bathroom.
No, I'm not filibustering. I'm just saying, like, I just want to know how far do you guys want to go before
I'm trying to answer
with questions, right?
Yeah, like that's why I wanted to gauge the audience's attention to see if there's any questions or if they've left or what.
Well, there's people that are offering lots of points because you gotta remember
people's patience with these shows, right? That some of the Molyneux shows can go on longer than Atlas Shrugged piled on top of Crime and Punishment.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying though, because we are, obviously the kind of people that are very independent and outspoken. Well, that's the kind of audience you're going to get, right? So less with the questions and more with their own opinions, right? So, but I did put out there about I'm starting to see a few come down now. So we will get. I'm just more or less laid out there. How far do you guys want to go? Or I mean, how much longer do you guys want to go? And I'll let the people that
are willing to go on though. But other than that, I'm worried about like making this too long a show where people look at it and go, "What? It's 5 hours?"
Yeah. So that's all I'm saying is, do you want how long you want to go before we start to try to take some questions? That's all I'm asking. I'm not trying to filibuster, just trying to ask.
Yeah, no. Well, the questions will determine how further we go. So,
well, perhaps we could, perhaps I could just make one quick point, and then we could take questions. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Matt, and don't even think, like I say, I'm not even trying to rush you in any way.
No. I wanted to do was just clarify the point I was making before with regards to the private property thing is, a state border or a national border, like the wall that Trump's wants. What I'm saying is that wall is a violation of the non-aggression principle. Whether it was the state doing it, it would also be one if it was private people doing it, because your property rights does not include the right to exclude people from things that you don't own. So you can exclude people from your property, you can't exclude people from other people. Yeah.
Matt, maybe we don't have a disagreement here. Okay, look at, if somebody takes you up in their privately owned plane and demand at mid-air to certain death that you at this moment leave my property, would properly be accused of murder. This does not make property rights and problematic. Okay, it's a context. It doesn't mean that therefore because somebody made an error in mathematics that it's now therefore mathematics is invalidated.
No, I'm not saying property rights are problematic. I'm just saying that property rights, just like I say, they're defined by the non-aggression principle and they are restricted by it. You have, like I say, you have the right to do, you own yourself, you have the right to do what you want with yourself as long as you don't infringe on other people's rights. The same applies to your property. You own your property and you have the right to do with it what you want. But again, as long as you're not infringing, and exclusion would be a violation. If you excluded people from anything that's not your property, that would also be a violation.
Such a thing as forced association, though. You understand that?
Yeah, right? And that's wrong as well. I'm not advocating for that. I'm against that as well.
We invalidated open and closed borders, I think. You know, maybe by philosophical implications, I think you have, but if not like in verbal agreement. But do we have any questions?
Okay, let me go up there because actually, like I say, just as you guys confirmed for me, you're both coming at it from the same philosophical and principled stance. So I love actually watching you guys go. I love even having or even being a participant or just someone that's because you guys are doing so much. What I appreciate from these kinds of conversations, dialogues, or debates is you're giving people something to actually think about, and it's something that. It should be in the age of information. It should be well, of course, this is what we do. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there. They're only getting political dialogue and narratives that's not nuanced and doesn't leave any area of their mind for this kind of discussion. And I just want to point out right now, I'm very thankful for both of you guys for putting forth this, because I think you guys really might not even realize, although you might, that how much you're helping a whole lot of people. You know, you're helping a lot of people try to break through some of the things in their own mind, because, you know, we've all been, since we were kids, you know, we've been indoctrinated into a lot of things that we've had to break through ourselves. I'm sure you have, Matt. I'm sure you have, Victor. It's hard. It's difficult. Some of us are better at it because we have, I don't know, this natural tendency, I guess. I don't know. I know myself, even as a kid, I was just so curious about things. Some of us, I guess, are more predisposed to lead in that way or to search out higher ideals or concepts as far as like, what does this mean? What does it mean to be a free human being? And I'm very appreciative of the fact that you guys are offering the kind of nuanced positions that nobody is getting. And we can all recognize nobody's getting this stuff from anyone in the establishment
from the mainstream
or in academia. What's that? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, like if you have opposing signs on mainstream media, you know, conservatives or whatever, like they argue midstream.
Yeah,
you know?
Well, basically, as far as I'm concerned, they all just sit around and circle jerk each other. No one's actually even offering any actual honest dialogue. It's just there's a pre-constructed narrative. As long as they stay within the confines of that, that's where their arguments are. But at the end of the day, they're probably all gone home and saying, yeah, government good, screw the people. No, but like, yeah, I love seeing people like yourself being able to give information, provide it, and you can tell that you're coming at it not from a political stance or an ideological stance. What you're showing is you're coming at it from a curious intellectual endeavor type of stance. You're just someone that wants to come at what's the best way for us to deal with each other. And like I say, no matter if you live in a small society, well, your family, your community structure, your state or province, or your country, or the world. Ultimately, every conversation that you're going to have or any endeavor that has to do with human interaction, we've got to find out a way how we going to deal with each other, you know, in a manner that respects each other's autonomy and sovereignty. And that's what you guys have been saying. That's what you've been putting forth, present. That's why I love dealing with people like you, because you're like I say, you're offering something that nobody out there in the media is offering. And people are yearning for this. There's a reason why even someone like a U of T professor is now a rock star. That's not by like accident. That's not coincidence. That's because people want to, they want their mind to be used for more than just political constructions or ideologies. They want to learn. And because they've been starved of that. A lot of people have been starved of that for so long, especially our younger generation. So I just want to say, first and foremost, kudos to both of you guys for taking on this endeavor and helping to educate and inform the people in a manner that enlightens their mind. But if you want, I'll check and see what we got for questions here.
Do you mind if I just run to the toilet really quick?
Yeah, go for it, Matt. Go for it.
Cheers.
Yeah, so we're going on. Thank you for that feedback, Bennett, from yourself. Here's another nuanced thing, that when you have an open border, it's done by permission, not the recognition of rights. So I think that's kind of like self-abasing, you know, like, we give you permission for your freedom of movement to serve our agenda.
Yeah, this slavery makes
I don't know what the principle is. I'm kind of lost on the principle.
Yeah, I get it.
Agenda behind the open borders, boys and girls.
Yeah, I'm just reading through the comments here.
Open by permission.
So basically, who needs to fire up the choppers? Slavery makes slaverson. So basically, who needs to fire up the choppers? That's not really a question, but let me.
What the hell does that even mean? What is that?
And he also put taxation theft. That's a truthful statement too, obviously. But
read some of the comments if there's no questions. It might be something to churn out.
Yeah. So from Piano Lady, citizens have a right to expect their governments to provide safe and sane societies where they can live and raise their families. Not a new concept. So I don't know if you want, I mean, I definitely could deal with this, but if you want to, either you gentlemen want to take a stab at this. So this is, like I say, from the Piano Lady, and her comment was, citizens have a right to expect their governments to provide a safe and sane society where they can live and raise their families. Not a new concept. So if you want to speak to that, either one of you gentlemen, to this Piano Lady, and kind of maybe clarify some thoughts or some concepts in regards to what she's trying to put forward and present there.
Yeah, no, I got something to say about that, but go ahead, Matt. Like, again, I'm always want to be conscious of the other guy, but
well, I mean, my response to that would be that citizens, or anybody else for that matter, doesn't have any right other than to be left alone.
Negative rights, right, Matt?
Yeah. So, I mean, they don't have, I wouldn't agree with the idea that they have the right for their government to protect them. I certainly think that we need to build societies where we do protect people from criminals, and I think we'll do that a lot easier if we have, like I say, the Napper's Law established for a peace agreement that we are united in enforcing, rather than a ruling government that enforces arbitrary laws, many of which actually violate our rights. So that would be my response to that.
Right on. Go ahead, Victor.
Yeah, no, and obviously, as an anarchist, I recognize that the whole idea of government being defined as that institution instituted to protect rights is nonsense. For Christ's sakes, that might be the alleged theory and approach of a certain type of government, namely like an American republic system that attempted to limit it to, with its checks and balances for the protection of individuals. And you'll have philosophers like John Locke and so forth argue that the proper, and Ayn Rand, of course, and other philosophers argue that the government's only proper function is for the protection of peoples. But if we understand government, just not focusing on this or that government, but just government as an institution, as an abstract concept, wherever it's been instituted at any time and place, is that institution which initiates force. So an institution that initiates force, and is said thereby to be a protector from force. It's a ridiculous contradiction, and that's one of the things that's problematic for the anarchists, and it's a valid argument, and as an anarchist, I accepted it long ago.
Excellent.
Ridiculous contradiction.
Yeah, we got another one. Actually, I scrolled up a little bit, and that was the same, this Slavery McSlaverson. It's quite the name, huh? Pretty sure it's probably not his real name, but anyways. Has Victor or yourself or anyone really thought about a Canadian Free State project? So I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. I'm pretty sure you probably are, Victor. Not sure about anyone else as far as the Free State project, but it's something that happens. It's down in New Hampshire, which is one of those states in the U.S. that a lot of libertarians have congregated to, and they figured rather than try the political means per se as the only platform or institution that you use to create freedom, is to no, just put a whole lot of people in the same geographical area that are all about promoting the fundamentals and principle adherence to liberty, or the philosophy of liberty. And that, by the natural extension of putting a whole lot of people in that same geographical area, well, it kind of makes sense, actually. If you put a lot of people that care about freedoms and liberties, you probably will have a pretty good chance of making that propagated through at least your immediate community, and who knows how far that could spread.
The state project wasn't the objective was to slant the vote in a certain direction by the very congregation that was taking place. Wasn't that like planned and orchestrated in that such a way?
Well, that would depend on if you were looking, because there were quite a few different. That's the thing with, obviously, when you're talking about something like that, you're talking about people like even Christopher Cantwell, I believe, was someone that. So as libertarians or anarchists, there are a lot of people with lots of different ideas or concepts. But at least, I guess, what I understood, I mean, I could be corrected in some way, but at least what I understood is, now some of them were probably advocating for particular political structure.
Why were they congregating?
But it was more or less, I think, the overarching umbrella, the concept of the Free State Project was to start at least with one state in the U.S., which New Hampshire does at least have more social and economic freedoms than a lot of the other states within the Union. And they said, let's go there and start expanding upon those liberties and freedoms, because we recognize that at least there we have a basis and a platform, or at least some kind of ground where we can start from, where at least people are working from at least a quasi understanding of the concept of liberty.
I don't know if Matt knows anything about that, but certainly for the camaraderie that's made possible by proximity, that's all well and good. But I specifically understand that part of it was also to sway the legislate in that area, and that was one of the Free State Project. Sounds like there's ideas behind it, and not something like a social network. And when you do consider that, though, like if they're trying to even like in an indirect form affect even if they to vote for a libertarian candidate to get away from the left and the conservative and the socialist or the Democrat or liberal or whatever you want to call it, to get away from that, to get a libertarian vote in there, I think that was also a part of it. But it also goes to show you that, bringing back to the borders, that the left, like once again, are doing the very same thing which these libertarians are trying to do, but on the opposite moral pole, of course, though, is to affect the voting base, because they lost the argument. They lost they lost the argument as exemplified by the presidency of Trump. I think that can serve as a symptom as well of a philosophical shift in the winds, that the election of Trump, however, my stance on that is irrelevant, but is indicative, though, of a philosophical climate to get away from the cabal that I think people understood explicitly or on some kind of like nonverbal gut level feeling that something is wrong here, something wrong is taking place. And, but it's still on their statism track, of course, that we'll get this leadership in Trump and whatnot, and Trump, and that's not to make an argument for Trump, even if I do recognize that I do not grant this premise that he is that he's a puppet. He's a threat to the powers that can be. I don't stand by that rock solid. There could be evidence to the contrary, but I don't get that now, so I'm not going with that, right?
Right. Well, without getting too much into the weeds of the actual project itself, I'm just kind of starting from, and I'm sure the person that's asking this question is just the concept. What do you think? And I'm going to hand this off to you now, Matt. What do you think of the concept of people that are, predisposed to the fundamental aspects and the philosophy of liberty, maybe congregating into areas where you have more like-minded people, so that you can propagate that, like I say, initially in your own community, and hope to show that, because think about how many times you've heard, oh, there's no such thing as a libertarian society. Like, I guess what I think maybe, like I say, there might be some people that had different derived concepts, but some of them thought that, hey, if we create a society that's all about libertarian values and show that it works, is that a good starting point or a basis for people to show, right? Exactly.
And just before Lim answered, like libertarian values, not like some cultural relativism, where you're trying to social engineer contrary views and mix up the oil in the water. But go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's always good when you can show sort of real life examples of things working, and so yeah, I think that would be a positive thing. It's a little bit like, you know, when I talk about what the Nations of Sanity is proposing and trying to achieve with this whole establishing the Napper's law, and people sort of say, well, how did you know, it's pie in the sky stuff, I realize, but, you know, if it was going to happen, would it happen worldwide, or would it happen nation by nation or state by state, or would you form a little society and hope it spreads out and catches on, or whatever? And I don't have an answer for how that would be, because I honestly don't know if it ever happened at all. But there's a good chance you'd have a scenario where you'd have, like, so say you managed to convert the whole of America, not just the United States, the whole continent of America, into a free society. But you still had, like, Saudi Arabia, for example, just as much as a statist, authoritarian, fascist regime as it is now. What you're going to have there is you're going to have a situation where you're going to have a free society, and then you're going to have a state society. Now, by morals, you can use force against Saudi Arabia, but practically speaking, it probably wouldn't be a good idea. It's a little bit like how, on a moral level, like when I make the point with regards to immigration about how it's not morally right to use force against immigrants to stop them crossing the border because they're not aggressing and it's an act violation and what have you. But my point is it's not morally right to do that, because the government are the ones that are aggressing against you, and that transposes to everything. I just apply that same principle to everything else, whatever the situation is. But you would have the right. We don't fight against our government, not because we don't have the right to, but because we don't have the means to. You know, we pay our taxes if we can't avoid it, not because we don't but because we don't have the might to resist the thugs with guns. You know, so that's the situation. So it's about whether you have the moral right or whether you have the ability are kind of separate subjects. And if you were to create an anarchist society, you would be within your rights to use force against every NAP violating entity or person going. So you'd be within your rights to try and overthrow the nearest state, but it might not be a good idea. And you'd have to be able to do it without obviously harming innocent people and what have you. So sorry, I went on a bit there.
Yeah, no, that was great. Like I say, I'm very appreciative of you guys offering this. And actually, I seen already that another commenter had basically said it's only guys that are, you know, come from that libertarian concept or the understanding of that can actually get this deep into the weeds of these kinds of conversation. And I'm, like I say, I'm very appreciative that we delve into it much deeper than what most people are used to. Now, we do have another comment. Which it is actually something that we talk about, taxation theft, and lots of memes are passed around, but we should really kind of get into, if you want to, or you don't, like, we don't have to per se, but when you're talking about, we've never had proper, this person, Stan Ulrich, we've never had proper representation for our taxation. I think that's something that's of quite, and it definitely is regard to this issue in regard to borders, is yes, if people were just held account, like if everything was done like you say, you know, when you want particular services or anything provided, if it wasn't through a top-down authoritarianism, but it was through voluntary exchanges, that would have a dramatic effect on the incentive structures and why people would want to come to countries and how they would come to the countries. And I think it would resolve a lot of the issues that problems have, because I think at the core of most of these issues, now there are some people that are just inherently racist. Those people, well, whatever. We're not going to worry about those people. But for most people, when they see that you have a wealth redistributive state, they get obviously concerned when they have no, people just take their money, a portion of their income, and they have no way to hold whoever takes that portion of their income to account and where that goes. That obviously is at the core of most of the debates, arguments, and discussions that we're having today. Would you both agree with that?
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and finish your thought there, Matt.
Please.
Well, I mean, yeah, I do agree with that. I mean, and like I say, I'm not completely unsympathetic to the people that have concerns with regards to immigration. I just think, certainly from a voluntarist point of view, but even anybody who wants to apply principles consistently, I just think it's important for those people to stay focused on where the real crime is in the equation. And I suppose that's my concern when it comes to this border issue. You know, like I say, because I'm not dismissing the points that Victor's made. with regards to the problems of immigration. I fully understand that, and I do appreciate that. And I also don't sort of go along with this rhetoric of, dismissing concerns as, racism or xenophobia and all that, because although why you say there might be people of that persuasion, it's not fair to to tar everybody with that brush just for wanting to have questions about this issue. Because yes, it's not fair that when you're being robbed for taxation, that people who haven't contributed at all come in and get to use that. It's not fair. But that's what happens when a ruling government rules over you and robs you. They're not going to do anything that like I said, I suppose my point of view is it's really about, again, it's about focusing on where the crime is and who the criminals are. And just because we are seemingly impotent against the real criminals doesn't mean that we should turn our attention to people that aren't actually aggressing against us, which is kind of my point with the border thing. We need to focus on the actual crime and the actual criminals and work towards that. And as I say, and even if you can't create an entirely free society, I still think even if you just want to attack specific issues, like with the reasons why immigration's a problem, tackle the drug law before you start wasting taxpayers' money building a wall that would fix many of the problems that the wall is purporting to fix. And focus on the fact that, a welfare state that is run by a corrupt government is going to be the way it is. It's going to be inefficient. It's going to, of course they want dependents. Of course they want people that are dependent on the system, so that are going to keep voting to keep that system in place. Of course the government are going to do all of these things, and they're going to continue doing all of these things.
They're worried by the philosophical climate of the host population, that they're looking to artificially fatten their base from most definite collectivist left voting bets. I mean, you may very well argue, look at, certainly the Democrats and these elitist planners, they can look at this from a sociological aerial view, while the libertarians and the anarchists below are not looking at the forest, but looking at the bark of wood on the tree by going, well, you can't judge all individuals, like having a minority report on the content of somebody's mind is necessary in order to establish a precedent that has already been sent of what happens when you import the third world at be numbering in the millions. And so long as you have like a society where a philosophical base has to be established of what kind of society that's going to be, if you tip over at a certain balance, it becomes an entirely different society. It becomes an entirely different society. And you know what? Like again, I mean, I can't stress. I don't know why this point is lost. Because you're talking about, like, I have a problem with immigration. Yes, I have a problem with immigration. You mean to tell me that you don't? Immigration is a state program. Of course, I got a problem with it. This is not the spontaneous freedom of movement. Like I said, open and closed borders is a false economy. They're fluid. They're going back and forth. The government is calling the shots. It's always done by government fiat. Like I say, in Europe, maybe you have to go through the whole rigmarole of passports. If you're coming from the Western Hemisphere, some Canadian dude trying to go to France, like I say, but it's open carte blanche when it comes to a third. They're deciding who. They're making the decisions. You understand who and when not. Yeah, open borders here, not open borders there. Fluid constructs that serves the purposes of the elite. That's all. Once you have a government in place, the agenda is only this: to preserve their power and to expand their power, two-pronged level, to preserve it, to expand it. And if it takes an open border, God damn it, to do it, then that's what they're doing. And just as much as it's a closed border is a infringement of rights. Look at, I know a Japanese girl. I work with a lot of different people, like come across a lot of different business people. I know of this Japanese girl working at this restaurant. She was working on a visa. It expired. She wanted to renew it. She was denied. She has full-time employment. She's a good person. Her employers vouched for her. But according to this government, it's like, no, you got to leave. But then we're letting in people from the southern side of Canada, like completely unvetted, unchecked, and just like provided with hotel spaces and what I understand also, like the what do you call it? Like for the homeless people, the shelters. You don't find this to be a ridiculous injustice? You can't see the corruption, and no matter where you go.
Yeah, no, I see the corruption and I see the injustice, but I'm just focused again. My focus is on where the actual crime is, where the injustice is, and where, of course, government are going to do these things. Like I say, that's what happens when you have a government, which is why we need to get rid of government. But it's not.
Yeah, sorry, all the things we agree on makes a wonderful show. But have I made the case against open borders, though?
I understand.
Open state borders.
Well, yes. I mean, like I say,
if I was a Trumpite arguing for if it was Lawrence Southern, you probably would have kicked my ass long ago, right? But you understand my arguments, though, at least.
Yeah, I understand that you're not making the same argument that someone like Lawrence Southern is
or
making.
Even Stefan Molyneux, for that matter.
Or even Stefan Molyneux. I should certainly hope not. But like I say, I mean, the problem is all of these things are just additional arguments against government. These are just more examples of why we need to get rid of government. But what they are not, and this is where I sort of stand firm, what they are not are arguments for the enforcement of a state border. They are not. They're not. No, let me just finish. I'm not straw manning you as is your position. I'm just clarifying mine. What I'm saying is what these things are not is then they don't mean that immigrants are aggressing against us. So they don't lay a non-aggression principle consistent stance for the enforcement of state borders. Like I say, I understand the complexities of it. I understand we're not in a free society, but it doesn't change the fact. I don't like our welfare system. I don't like anything government does, even the good things. Even one other point I'd just like to quickly make that I meant to make earlier with regards to this wall thing, because someone asked me about, because there was obviously that GoFundMe thing where obviously private citizens were voluntarily donating for, I don't think it even got like 1% of the goal, but they made, I think they raised quite a few million, and someone asked me what I thought about that, and I mean, I basically thought it was pretty repugnant in many ways. The only good thing I sort of said about it was it's nice that people can demonstrate that when they want something that they would normally expect government to pay for, or to be paid for through, the stolen money from taxation, that they can actually get together and raise quite a considerable amount of money for something that they want. My problem with it, though, was, and I'll come back to this point, even if it's privately funded, the wall is still immoral. It's still a non-aggression principle violation because people don't have the right of exclusion. And this is one little point I will just make that's, it might even sound like a defensive.
In your mouth to know that you agree with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. Doesn't that lead to agree with them? The wall's immoral. You're in the same swamp waters. Doesn't that make you? It's kind of ironical.
Well, no, not really. Hitler could say that 2 + 2 = 4. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't just because he said it. You know what I mean? And the wall is immoral. I mean, I'm not coming at it from the same position as the people you mentioned, who I'm assuming are politicians, but. I know Nancy Pelosi. I've heard that name. I didn't hear the other one, so I'm assuming he's a politician as well. But yeah, I mean, but my position is different from theirs, because the reason why because the reason why it's immoral is the same reason why everything else that I say is immoral is immoral. It's the non-aggression principle. It's not the same level of severity by any stretch of the imagination, but it's the same principle that defines why rape is immoral, that defines why theft is immoral, that defines why assault is immoral, that defines why trespassing is immoral. All of these things are violations of the same basic principle, obviously massively different in severity. Not saying that they're comparable on that level, and I'm not saying that a wall is equatable to a much more severe crime, but it is a violation of the non-aggression principle. It is an act of aggression against people that aren't themselves aggressing against us.
I know, Matt. We've been like probably.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've clarified our position. So
I know we agree on a lot. And I mean, it like would it be like so far-fetched as to suggest that of course you would agree that when the government opens its borders, it's done by permission. They don't do it in the sense of we're recognizing citizens' rights and finally in this one.
Of course not. Of course not.
By permission. That's not the same thing of a rights granted observation. Right?
If I could just actually give one example, just quickly, it's like with the legalization of cannabis that's going on to various degrees in various places.
Yeah,
that's not the government doing something out of the kindness of their own heart. And again, it's still an infringement because they've not ended the law. They've just changed the prohibition to something they call legalization or yeah. But it's still that basic principle of them giving us permission for what we can grow and put in our body and what have you. It's that basic absurdity. So yeah, of course, even when government do things like that, it's not through any level of virtue, and it's usually very corrupt and usually with very underhand motives, and that's the case with. And I won't go into the details of that, but that's what's happening with that as well.
That's why because open borders, because it kind of like makes a hash of ethical decisions, like I tried to get with the home invasion. You know, it's like if I argue against open borders, and if I argue it in the sense of what we've been discussing, open by permission and to serve a leftist agenda, political goals, well, of course I'm going to be against that. But then I get snared into, oh, so you want to impede my progress if I want to invite my Mexican friend? You know, like these fucking idiots, man. These fucking idiots, right? But that makes a mash of ethics. You see, that's why you can't derive a principle from this.
Yeah, okay. I mean, but I suppose, and just if I can just invoke that cannabis example again, I suppose the point I'm making is just like I've been nothing but disgusted by most of the legalization models I've seen because they're clearly done to just.
Oh, so you're saying that people can't smoke what they want and put into the body as they choose. Then, you know, can you imagine you've got that shit shot at you? You know.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is it's like for example, you move from a full prohibition to some kind of legalization model where people are allowed to maybe. They can access it through some prescription, and if it's licensed, then it's like a patented product.
Of course, we're on the same page.
But the point I'm making is as undesirable as that situation is, the fact of the matter is it will always be and has always been immoral for any drug, let alone cannabis, to be illegal in the first place, for it to be a crime. So. Even though they've changed that rules into a kind of corporate serving,
you can do this by permission. You can do this by permission.
Exactly. It's that same premise. So I understand what you're talking about with the false dichotomy of the state border. But like I say,
according to leftist agenda is open or close according to government fiat to serve ends. You know, there's no principle to be derived like the pot laws, right? I give you permission to smoke the weed. There's no rights being recognized there. Privileges can be revoked.
Exactly, and that's the situation you've got. Yeah, and that's the situation you've got with the state border. But I suppose with the way where my position stands firm is I'm always against the enforcement of the state border, even with these other scenarios coming into place, because I don't recognize it as legitimate. And it just goes back to that basic, the only border you can enforce is your own private property.
Exactly. Yeah, and to be against closed borders doesn't mean that necessarily, therefore, logically, you're for open borders. Not when it entails all this other shit that we've covered, right? You agree with that?
Exactly. Well, yeah, because I oppose all that other shit. That's my point. I oppose all that other shit. But I suppose the thing I'm rejecting, I'm not saying this is your position, you can tell me if it is or not, just to clarify, but the notion that I'm rejecting when I accept that is saying that even though we aren't in that situation, even though we're in a statist paradigm where we've got welfare and all these things that I do oppose, even though those are being forced on me, I'm still opposing that. I'm just because I've got to accept, like, I'm not going to let one state violence justify another state violence, I suppose is the way I'm trying to say it. And the fact that we have a welfare state doesn't mean that we should have violent enforcement of state borders.
Yeah, well, I mean, I want to wrap up now. Certainly, I've made my summation that to the exact same point that I have against closed borders is the exact same point that I have against open borders, is because they're both by government fiat. I go for the principle stance of an anarchist society. That doesn't mean, well, there'll never be justice in the world. Justice always prevails, even in statist societies. Doesn't mean that the ethics are faulty. Doesn't mean that we have to make a false dichotomy between being morally consistent and pragmatism to save us from our principles, right? It's just, it all comes down to, if we're going to have a free society, that's going to be a principally based society, and nothing less than that will achieve it. And you won't have that with the state, not on derivative issues such as immigration and the borders. That's my closing statement.
Yeah, that sounds like a good summarization. I think you both did a great job putting forth, presenting your stance on the issue. And it brings me to this Kevin Pickering to be the last comment. There's lots in there actually. And believe me, there's not only is there a lot of comments, but you're having an informal debate happening even within our section here. So good for you. Kudos for all of you involved here. But let's just end with Kevin Pickering. Simple. Vetted immigration with limits. Hey, Kevin, if it was that simple, we wouldn't require having these kinds of debates and discussions. But I'm with you there. I wish it was that easy. My goodness, I bet Victor, I bet Matt. I'm sure we all wish it was that simple, but that's the point of this, 2.5 hour discussion, and there's been many more than this, is to help allude to you people that it's just not quite that easy. It's not as black and white as even the original concept of this debate would suggest, or even my attire for that matter, right? But no, there's a lot of nuanced conversation that has to take place. That's the beautiful thing. That's why people that are all about, understand things from the philosophical, universally consistent moral concepts, and understanding the importance of holding individuals to account rather than these concepts, these big overarching concepts regarding collectivism. That's what denies every one of us our individual derived knowledge in regards to what does it mean to be a free human being? How should we cohabitate and coexist amongst each other and be universally consistent in our morals or ethics? That's why we're doing these kinds of conversations, to show you that you can watch CBC News or Global, and they'll give you that 4-minute segment where they'll have like 3 people on there arguing basically the same point, just from a little different perspective. Right? No, we're going to give you, we're going to actually make you think about these things. Right? No, that's what we're doing is we're saying you're going to have to think about these things a lot more deeply than just, I'm going to pick team A or team B. No, it requires a lot of nuanced thought, and you're hearing two. And like I said, I don't know Matt from a hole in the ground, but already I'm saying, and I'm thinking, I'm a pretty good judge of character. He seems like a really well-reasoned, awesome dude that just like Victor, we're just trying to figure this stuff out, folks. And put it this way, if there's one thing you don't have to worry about, Matt don't want to rule you. Victor don't want to rule you. I don't want to rule you. All we're trying to do is offer some semblance or some reason, right? Just take a stance and give, no matter which side it comes from. That's why I love these conversations, is at least it'll show you that we're not coming at it from an authoritarian standpoint. We're trying to come at it from at least a somewhat objective standpoint, a moral standpoint, and saying that maybe I don't know everything. That's why we're having these conversations. I'm not telling you how to think. We're saying that we really do have to think. And like I say, Matt and Victor have done a great job. And hopefully you'll take that forward and spread that in your own, like if you have your own YouTube channel, on your own social media pages, or just maybe if you're out hanging out at the bar with someone and you ever get into those political or philosophical discussions, at least you're going to have a little bit more ammunition at your disposal now, because you don't have to come at it from a political perspective. You can come at it from a philosophical perspective. You can come at it from just someone that's saying, I don't know everything, but I want to at least make sure I'm aligning with people that are morally, ethically consistent and are striving to achieve some kind of level of success, and how we can find ways to cohabitate and coexist. Because like I say, no matter if you're talking on the familial scale or on the global scale, that's at the end of the day, we just want to live and let live. That's all most of us, that's all I've heard from Matt. That's all I'm hearing from Victor. That's all I'm hearing from a lot of people. We just want to say, you can do you. You do you. I'll do me. But we have to allow for that difference. The only thing that matters most to us is we got to figure out what's the ground rules. Just like if you were sitting down to play a board game or going to play a hockey game or going to play, if you're going to have any kind of social interaction, there has to be some ground rules. We haven't perfected what those ground rules should be. That's why 20th century, we thought, post-Enlightenment era, 18th, 19th century, 20th century, we thought we figured it all out. We haven't. There's still some tweaks. Humanity hasn't reached full maturity yet as far as, the philosophical endeavor of what it means to be a free human being. We're going to get there someday. I don't know when the hell that's going to be. Hopefully a lot sooner rather than a lot later. And thanks to the information age and having the ability to have these kinds of discussions in real time and live for people to listen to, that's going to help us. Trust me, this is only going to help us. Even those of you that might disagree with something Matt says or Victor says, it's going to make you think. And really, at the end of the day, that's all we're trying to do. Not trying to thrust or impose our ideas or mandates or edicts on us or on you. That's why we're the live and let live kind of people. But we also understand that you have to be educated. You have to be informed. To have a free society, well, it's not just liberty. I've said this in the past too. Liberty and personal responsibility, well, the absence of either means you're not going to have either. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help educate, inform, and enlighten people. And I hope you've enjoyed this amazing debate between these two gentlemen. And like I said, we can deal with this on not just the border issue. We can deal with lots of other topics going forward. Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you, Victor. I really appreciate you guys taking the time out to do this. And I think, like I say, whether it's today, tomorrow, a month, a year from now, 10 years from now, I think you've done a lot to help educate and inform the people in regards to how you should put forth and present your kind of nuanced position in regards to an issue so important as borders.
Yeah, you know, I did enjoy the conversation very much, and I'm certainly open to continue it with some other topic on another time, and that'd be great if you'd have us again. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and likewise, I'd love to have other conversations in the future, and I really appreciate Victor taking the time to have this conversation, and you, Bennett, for taking the time to host us. Really appreciate that. As you say, it is important to have these conversations, especially good faith conversations, which, you know, obviously both me and Victor have gone into this with good faith and a desire to understand each other's perspectives and that. And like you say, it gives food for thought for everybody to help us all develop our own ideas, and also because we're all coming from the same general place of wanting a free society where you don't rule me and I don't rule him, and we all just get along. And like I say, what I'm trying to do with the Nations of Sanity thing is kind of saying, well, perhaps one day we'll get enough of us of that mindset, united on that mindset of the non-aggression principle, that we can perhaps outnumber and outmuscle all the bastards that want to rule us and oppress us and violate our rights. So, and maybe one day we'll have a free society where the non-aggression principle is the law, and things like borders will be a moot issue because they'll only apply to private property. But yeah, really appreciate it, guys. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Right on. I yearn for that day, guys. I want to say I yearn for that day, right? And hopefully with enough of us out there fighting and promoting these kind of ideas, we'll get there some point. I'm going to end this live discussion now, this broadcast. Hopefully you guys will stay tuned and tune into the next time we have a nice live discussion and debate, and it's going to be on maybe in another topic, but join us next time, because this is the thing. Those of us, I'd like to say, it's all about ideas, folks, and that's what we're here for. We're trying to discuss ideas. So where you're being failed at in other places in your life, or you're not going to have to worry about that, because like I say, this is the age of information, and somebody's going to fill that gap, that void. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.